The crystal chandelier in the Blackwell Foundation's ballroom cast prismatic rainbows across the faces of Charleston's elite, their laughter mixing with the soft notes of the string quartet I'd hired for tonight's gala. I stood at the edge of the crowd, champagne flute in hand, watching 300 of the city's most influential residents celebrate another successful fundraising event. The annual Children's Hospital benefit had exceeded our goal by 40%, a triumph that should have filled me with satisfaction. Instead, I felt hollow. Eleanor, darling, Margaret Whitmore approached, her emerald necklace catching the light. Another spectacular evening. The hospital board is absolutely thrilled with the results. Thank you, Margaret, I replied, forcing the practiced smile that had served me well through countless social functions. The children's cardiac wing renovation will make such a difference. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. She nodded enthusiastically, already scanning the room for her next conversation. That was the nature of these events: beautiful, successful, and ultimately superficial. I'd organized dozens of them over the past 15 years, raising millions for causes close to my heart, yet tonight felt different. Tonight, I felt like an actress playing a role I'd grown tired of. My eyes swept the ballroom, searching for Julian. My husband had been unusually quiet during dinner, barely touching his salmon and offering only perfunctory responses to the conversation around our table. When I'd asked if he was feeling well, he'd given me that tight smile I'd been seeing more frequently lately and assured me everything was fine. Everything was not fine. I found him near the bar, his dark hair perfectly styled, his black tuxedo impeccable as always. Julian Carrington knew how to dress for success. It was one of the first things I'd noticed about him when we met at Rutherford, Mills and Associates 12 years ago. He'd been a junior associate then, hungry and charming, with dreams bigger than his modest salary could support. I'd been immediately drawn to his ambition, his sharp wit, his ability to make me laugh even during the long hours we'd spend reviewing contracts for the foundation's acquisitions. But tonight, something was wrong with the picture. Julian stood close to someone too close for polite conversation. My breath caught as I recognized the sleek auburn hair, the vintage Halston dress I'd helped select. Camille. My sister's laugh carried across the room, that musical sound that had always seemed effortless while mine felt calculated. She touched Julian's arm as she spoke, her fingers lingering on his sleeve. They looked comfortable together, intimate in a way that made my stomach clench with sudden understanding. Mrs. Carrington, the voice belonged to James, our longtime driver. Your car is ready whenever you're prepared to leave. I nodded, unable to look away from the scene unfolding near the bar. Julian leaned down to whisper something in Camille's ear, and she tilted her head back, smiling up at him with the kind of radiant joy I hadn't seen from her in years. The kind of joy I couldn't remember ever seeing directed at me. Actually, James, I think I'll wait a bit longer, I murmured, my voice steadier than I felt. The gala continued around me, but I might as well have been watching through glass. Conversations became white noise. The string quartet's melody turned discordant. The champagne in my glass grew warm and flat as I stood frozen, processing what I was seeing. They weren't being obvious about it. Both Julian and Camille were too socially astute for that, but I knew them both intimately, and the signs were unmistakable. The way Julian's hand briefly touched the small of her back as he guided her through the crowd. The way Camille's eyes sought his across the room even when she was speaking to someone else. The way they both seemed to glow with some private happiness. That excluded everyone else, including me. Eleanor. A warm voice interrupted my surveillance. Mo Color appeared at my elbow, her silver hair elegantly swept up, her designer gown perfectly fitted to her petite frame. You look like you've seen a ghost. Something like that, I replied, finally tearing my gaze away from Julian and Camille. Mo followed my line of sight, her expression shifting from concern to understanding to fury in rapid succession. Oh, honey, she breathed. How long has this been going on? I'm not sure it's what it looks like, I said automatically though. Even as the words left my mouth, I knew they were false. It was exactly what it looked like. Eleanor. Mo's voice was gentle but firm. I've been divorced twice. I know what it looks like when a man is falling out of love with his wife and into love with someone else. The words hit me like a physical blow. Falling out of love. When had that happened? When had Julian stopped seeing me as a woman and Started seeing me as merely a convenient partner in his social and financial aspirations. Has he said anything to you? Mo asked quietly. I shook my head, but he's been distant lately, working late more often, less interested in. I trailed off, unwilling to voice the intimate details of my marriage's decline even to my closest friend. You need to talk to him, Mo said. Tonight, before this goes any further. I glanced back toward the bar, but Julian and Camille had moved. I spotted them on the far side of the ballroom, engaged in animated conversation with the Hendersons, one of Charleston's oldest families. To anyone watching, they appeared to be simply enjoying the party, but I could see the undercurrent of tension, the way they stood just slightly too close, the way their eyes met and held for just a moment too long. Mrs. Carrington, another voice, this one belonging to Sandra Chen, the foundation's program director. The photographer would like to get a few shots of you and Mr. Carrington before the evening ends. Of course, I said, though the thought of posing for pictures with Julian while my world crumbled around me felt surreal. Let me find him. I made my way across the ballroom, nodding and smiling at familiar faces, accepting congratulations on another successful event. The social mask I'd worn for decades had never felt heavier. Julian, I said when I reached him, my voice carrying just enough authority to pull his attention away from whatever fascinating story Camille had been telling. The photographer needs us for a few shots. Right, he said, his smile faltering slightly as he met my eyes. Of course, we posed for the photographs, Julian's arm around my waist, both of us smiling for the camera. To the photographer, to the remaining guests, to anyone who might see these images in tomorrow's society pages, we looked like the perfect Charleston power couple. Eleanor and Julian Carrington, she the heir to the Blackwell fortune and he the brilliant attorney who'd helped expand her family's influence. The perfect lie. The last guest filtered out around 11, thanking me for a wonderful evening, promising to call soon, making the social noises required by events like these. Mo squeezed my hand as she left, whispering, call me tomorrow. Don't let this fester. Finally, it was just Julian, Camille, and me in the emptying ballroom. The staff was already beginning to clear tables, their movements efficient and quiet. I dismissed them with a nod, telling them to finish in the morning. Great turnout tonight, Camille said, her voice artificially bright. You really outdid yourself, Eleanor. Thank you, I replied, studying my sister's face. At 28, Camille was still beautiful in that effortless way that had always made me feel clumsy by comparison. Tonight, she seemed to glow from within, happiness radiating from every pore. I should probably head home, she continued, avoiding my eyes. Early morning tomorrow. Actually, Julian said, his voice carefully neutral, I think we should all sit down and talk. The words hung in the air between us. I felt my pulse quicken, my hands growing cold despite the warmth of the evening. Talk about what? I asked, though I already knew. Julian looked at Camille, some silent communication passing between them. She nodded almost imperceptibly, then gathered her evening bag and wrap. I'll call you tomorrow, she said to me, still not meeting my eyes. Then to Julian, good luck. She kissed my cheek, the gesture feeling like a betrayal in itself, and left us alone in the ballroom. The silence stretched between Julian and me, filled with the weight of unsaid truths. Eleanor, he began, then stopped, running a hand through his hair. This isn't how I wanted this to happen. How what to happen? I asked, though my voice sounded distant to my own ears. He sighed, looking around the ballroom as if searching for the right words among the abandoned champagne glasses and scattered programs. I've been trying to find the right time to talk to you about us. About our marriage. Our marriage, I repeated flatly. Things have changed between us, Eleanor. You have to feel it too. We've been more like business partners than husband and wife for months now. And whose fault is that? The question escaped before I could stop it, sharp and accusatory. It's not about fault, he said, his lawyer's training evident in his careful tone. People grow apart. It happens. People grow apart, I echoed. Or people find someone else. Julian's face flushed slightly, the first crack in his composed facade. Eleanor, how long? I asked, my voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside my chest. How long what? How long have you been sleeping with my sister? The words fell between us like stones into still water, creating ripples that would never fully settle. Julian's face went pale, then red, then resigned. "It's not what you think," he said finally. "It's exactly what I think," I replied. "The question is how long you've been lying to me about it." He was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. When he looked up, his eyes held something I'd never seen before, not quite guilt, but something close to it. 6 months, he said quietly. "But Eleanor, it just happened. Neither of us planned it." 6 months. Half a year of betrayal, of lies, of me planning our future while he dismantled it behind my back. I felt something cold and hard settle in my chest, replacing the shock with something far more dangerous. "I want a divorce," he said, the words coming out in a rush. "I'm sorry, Eleanor. I truly am. But I can't pretend anymore. I love her." I stared at him, this man I'd supported through law school, whose career I'd helped build, whose dreams I'd funded and nurtured and celebrated. Julian Carrington, who had just destroyed our marriage with the casual efficiency of a corporate merger. "I see," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. "We can work out the details amicably," he continued, his lawyer's mind already moving to logistics. "The house, the assets, everything can be handled fairly." "Fairly," I repeated, tasting the word like poison. "Eleanor, I know this is hard, but get out," I said quietly. "What?" "Get out of my house. Get out of my ballroom. Get out of my sight." Julian opened his mouth as if to argue, then thought better of it. He straightened his bow tie, gathered his dignity, and walked toward the exit. At the doorway, he turned back. "For what it's worth," he said, "I really am sorry." Then he was gone, leaving me alone in the ballroom where I'd just raised $250,000 for sick children while my husband planned his escape with my sister. I walked to the bar and poured myself 3 fingers of the expensive bourbon Julian preferred. The liquid burned my throat, but not enough to match the fire in my chest. I thought about the years I'd spent building this life, this identity as Eleanor Carrington, wife and philanthropist and Charleston society figure, all of it built on lies. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to Camille's name, then deleted it without reading whatever message she'd undoubtedly sent. Then I called the one person who'd never lied to me, who'd protected my family's interests for 3 decades. "Harlan," I said when he answered, my voice finally steady. "I need to see you first thing in the morning. It's about my will." The grandfather clock in my library chimed 9 times as Harlan Vaughn settled into the leather wingback chair across from my mahogany desk. At 72, my family's longtime attorney still commanded respect with his silver hair perfectly combed and his 3-piece suit pressed to perfection. He'd been reviewing documents for an hour while I sat in silence, nursing my 3rd cup of coffee and watching Charleston wake up beyond my tall windows. "Eleanor," he said finally, removing his wire-rimmed glasses and fixing me with the steady gaze that had intimidated opposing counsel for decades. "I've reviewed everything you requested. The prenuptial agreement, your current will, the trust documents, and all joint holdings. I have to say, Julian's timing is rather suspicious." I set down my coffee cup with deliberate care. "What do you mean?" Harlan opened the manila folder beside him and withdrew a stack of papers. 3 weeks ago, Julian contacted our office requesting copies of certain documents. He claimed he needed them for tax preparation purposes. My blood chilled. "What documents?" "Your will, the foundation's charter, and the details of your family trust." When my assistant asked why he couldn't simply request these from you directly, he said you were too busy with gala preparations and he didn't want to burden you. I felt that familiar cold settling in my chest again, the same sensation I'd experienced watching Julian with Camille last night. "And you gave them to him?" "Technically, as your husband, he had legal right to access some of these documents," Harlan said carefully. "But it struck me as odd enough that I made copies of everything he requested. Call it an old lawyer's instinct." "What exactly did he see?" Harlan pulled out a document I recognized, my will, written 5 years ago when Julian and I had settled into what I'd believed was a happy marriage. "He saw that upon your death, he inherits half of your estate outright, with the remainder going to the foundation. He also saw that Camille, as your only living blood relative, would receive a significant portion should something happen to both you and Julian." The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. "He's been planning this." "It appears so," Harlan said grimly. "But there's more. I did some investigating after your call last night. Julian has been quite busy these past few months." He withdrew another set of papers. 2 months ago, he opened a new investment account in his name only. Last month, He transferred $40,000 from your joint savings account into it. The transfer was legal, he's an authorized user, but the timing raises questions. What else? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. He's been meeting with Preston Clark at Magnolia Financial. Preston specializes in high net worth divorce cases, particularly those involving significant inherited wealth. Harlan's expression darkened. I made some discreet inquiries. According to my sources, Julian has been asking very specific questions about South Carolina's inheritance laws and how divorce affects trust fund distributions. I stood and walked to the tall windows overlooking my garden, where the morning sun illuminated the azaleas my mother had planted 30 years ago. Everything in this house held memories, roots that ran deep into Charleston's history and my family's legacy. Julian had never understood that connection, had always seen the house as an asset rather than a home. He's been calculating this for months, I said to the glass. I'm afraid so. And Eleanor, there's something else you need to know about Camille. I turned back to face him. What about her? Harlan hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. 6 weeks ago, she came to see me. She asked about the possibility of contesting a will, specifically about what grounds might exist for challenging the distribution of family assets. The betrayal cut deeper than I'd thought possible. Not only had Julian been planning his escape, but Camille had been researching how to steal what remained. What did you tell her? Nothing, of course. I told her I couldn't discuss your private affairs, and suggested she consult her own attorney if she had concerns about estate planning. He paused. But Eleanor, she asked very specific questions about the 30-day clause. My stomach dropped. The 30-day clause was a provision in my will stating that any beneficiary who contested the document would forfeit their inheritance entirely. It was standard protection against frivolous challenges, but the fact that Camille knew about it meant she'd been doing serious research. They've been planning this together, I said, the words tasting bitter. The divorce, the inheritance challenge, all of it. It appears so. Julian divorces you, marries Camille, and they wait for your estate to pass to them naturally. If that takes too long, Camille challenges the will based on undue influence or mental incompetence, hoping to either win a larger share or force a settlement. I returned to my chair, my mind racing through the implications. How much would they stand to gain? Harlan consulted his notes. Your current estate is valued at approximately $12 million, not including the foundation's assets. Under your current will, Julian would inherit $6 million immediately upon your death. Camille, as your sister and backup beneficiary, would inherit another $3 million if Julian predeceased you. And if they successfully challenge the will, potentially everything, minus what's held in irrevocable trust. They could argue that as your husband and only living blood relative, they deserve the entire estate. I sat back in my chair, processing the magnitude of their betrayal. It wasn't just about love or desire, it was about money. My family's legacy that they planned to carve up like a Thanksgiving turkey. Harlan, I said, my voice gaining strength, I want to rewrite my will. Immediately. I assumed you might. What did you have in mind? I stood and walked to the bookshelf where I kept family photographs. My eyes found the picture of my goddaughter's son, Christopher Kitt, at his college graduation 3 years ago. Earnest, idealistic, passionate about environmental causes, everything Julian pretended to be, but never was. I want to leave everything to Kit Ainsley. Harlan raised an eyebrow. Your godson? Eleanor, that's a significant decision. Are you certain you want to cut out Julian and Camille entirely? Completely. Every dollar, every property, every stock certificate. I want them to inherit nothing from me except the knowledge that their betrayal cost them everything. What about the foundation? I turned back to face him. I want to restructure it as well. Create a new board, remove Julian's name from all documents, and establish a separate endowment that Kit can manage. Something focused on environmental protection and coastal restoration work that actually matters. Harlan made notes as I spoke, his pen scratching across legal pad in the familiar rhythm that had soundtracked many important decisions in my life. This will take some time to draft properly, he said. We'll need to be very careful about the language to ensure it's challenge-proof. Given what we know about Camille's research, she'll certainly try to contest any changes. How long? A week, perhaps 2. I want to research every possible angle they might use to challenge your decision. And in the meantime, Harlan said with a slight smile, I suggest you document everything. Julian's affairs, both romantic and financial. Camille's inquiries about your estate, any evidence of their coordination. If they try to challenge your new will, we'll be ready. I felt something I hadn't experienced since Julian's confession last night, a sense of purpose, of control returning to my grasp. There's one more thing, I said. I want to establish a trust that becomes active immediately, not upon my death. Something that gives me the power to control how my assets are distributed while I'm still alive. A revocable living trust, Harlan nodded. Excellent idea. It would allow you to maintain control while also providing protection against future challenges. How quickly can we establish it? If you're willing to work through the weekend, we could have the basic structure in place by Monday. The full documentation might take longer, but the trust itself could be active within days. I felt the first genuine smile cross my face since last night. Let's do it. Harlan packed his papers with the efficiency of decades of practice. Eleanor, I have to ask, are you certain about this course of action? Once we begin restructuring your estate, there's no going back without significant legal complications. I thought about Julian's face last night, the casual way he dismissed our marriage as something that just wasn't working. I thought about Camille's glowing happiness as she betrayed the sister who'd supported her through every crisis, every failure, every bad decision. I thought about the years I'd spent believing I was building something meaningful with people who saw me only as a source of financial security. I've never been more certain of anything in my life, I said. Very well. I'll begin drafting documents immediately. He paused at the door. For what it's worth, Eleanor, I think you're making the right decision. Your parents would be proud of how you're protecting their legacy. After Harlan left, I remained in the library, surrounded by the books and memories that represented generations of Blackwell history. My great-grandfather had built this house with money earned from shipping cotton. My grandfather had expanded the family's influence through careful investments, and my parents had transformed wealth into purpose through the foundation. Julian and Camille saw only dollar signs, but I saw responsibility, legacy, the weight of decisions that would outlast my lifetime. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found Kit's number. He'd be surprised to hear from me. We typically spoke only at holidays and family occasions, but I needed to understand more about his work, his vision, his character. And Eleanor? His voice carried surprise and warmth. Is everything okay? Hello, Kit. I hope I'm not calling too early. Not at all. I'm already at the restoration site. We're trying to plant marsh grass before the tide comes in. I could hear the sound of water and wine through the phone, the calls of seabirds in the background. It painted a picture of meaningful work, of someone making a tangible difference in the world. I was wondering if we could meet for lunch sometime this week, I said. I'd love to hear more about your work with coastal restoration. Really? That would be wonderful. I've been hoping to talk to you about some of our projects. We could really use the foundation's support. The irony wasn't lost on me. While Julian and Camille plotted to inherit my wealth, Kit was working to earn support for causes he believed in. I think that can be arranged, I said. In fact, I think you might be surprised by how much support I'm prepared to offer. After we arranged to meet Thursday at my favorite restaurant downtown, I hung up and returned to the window. In the garden below, I could see James, our groundskeeper, pruning the roses my mother had loved. Life continued its rhythms even as my world shifted on its axis. Julian and Camille thought they were playing chess with a pawn. They were about to discover they'd been playing with a queen. The Charleston harbor sparkled under the Thursday afternoon sun as I navigated my Mercedes down the winding road toward Folly Beach. I'd traded my usual designer suit for jeans and a cotton blouse, feeling oddly liberated by the casual clothes. When was the last time I'd dressed for comfort rather than appearance? When was the last time I'd left downtown Charleston for something other than a social obligation? Kit had suggested we meet at his current project site rather than a restaurant, explaining that low tide would give us the best view of their restoration work. Bring shoes you don't mind getting muddy, he'd warned, with a laugh that reminded me painfully of his mother. Sarah Ainsley had been my roommate at the College of Charleston, my maid of honor, and my closest friend until cancer took her 8 years ago. I'd held her hand in the hospital when she made me promise to look after Kit, to be the family he'd need when she was gone. It was a promise I'd honored financially but had largely failed emotionally, too wrapped up in my own life to maintain the close relationship Sarah had envisioned. The guilt of that failure sat heavy in my chest as I pulled into the sandy parking area where Kit had said to meet him. His battered Honda Civic looked out of place next to my luxury sedan, a reminder of the different worlds we inhabited. I spotted him immediately, knee-deep in marsh water with his jeans rolled up and his dark hair falling across his forehead as he bent over what appeared to be a measuring device. At 25, Kit had inherited his mother's gentle features and his father's height, creating a combination that was both familiar and heartbreaking. "Aunt Eleanor," he waved when he saw me, his face lighting up with genuine pleasure. "You actually came." "Of course I came," I called back, picking my way carefully across the uneven ground toward the water's edge. "Though I'm beginning to understand why you suggested old shoes." He laughed, the sound carrying across the marsh. "Fair warning, this isn't exactly a typical foundation site visit." I reached the edge of the restoration area, where wooden stakes marked sections of newly planted marsh grass. The work was meticulous, scientific, and clearly backbreaking. Volunteers and waiters moved methodically through the shallow water, following Kit's directions as they secured young Spartina plants in the mud. "How long have you been working on this section?" I asked. 6 months, Kit replied, wading toward shore with a tablet protected by a waterproof case. "We're trying to restore 15 acres of salt marsh that was damaged by Hurricane Clara 2 years ago. The ecosystem here supports dozens of species, but it's incredibly fragile." He handed me the tablet, which displayed detailed maps of the restoration area marked with GPS coordinates, plant survival rates, and water quality measurements. The level of scientific rigor impressed me. This wasn't amateur environmentalism but serious ecological work. "The funding has been challenging," Kit continued, unconsciously echoing what he'd told me on the phone. "Most grants want to see immediate results, but marsh restoration takes years to establish properly." I studied the data on the tablet, my mind automatically calculating costs and timelines. "How much would it take to complete this project?" "About $80,000 for the remaining materials and contracted labor. We've got the volunteer hours covered, but specialized equipment and professional consultation costs add up quickly." $80,000. I'd spent more than that on the ballroom renovation last year, money Julian had questioned as an unnecessary expense. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd been funding aesthetic improvements while Kit struggled to secure basic funding for work that would benefit entire ecosystems. "Tell me about your organization," I said, handing back the tablet. Kit's eyes brightened with the passion I'd seen in Sarah when she talked about her photography. "Coastal Futures started 3 years ago with just me and 2 college friends. We focus on salt marsh restoration, dune stabilization, and community education about climate resilience. The idea is to work with local communities rather than imposing solutions from outside." He led me along a wooden walkway that provided access through the restoration area without disturbing the delicate work. "This marsh, for example, protects the residential area behind us from storm surge. When Hurricane Clara hit, the areas with healthy marsh grass suffered minimal flooding, while developed coastline just a few miles away was devastated." "You're preventing future disasters," I observed. "Exactly. It's cheaper to restore natural barriers than to rebuild houses and businesses every few years." I watched the volunteers working in the distance, young people who'd given up their Thursday afternoon to plant grass in muddy water. Their dedication reminded me of my own early involvement with the foundation, back when I'd believed that wealth carried the responsibility to make a meaningful difference. "Kit," I said carefully, "what would you do if money weren't a constraint? If you could fully fund your vision for coastal restoration?" Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. He stopped walking and looked out over the marsh, considering the question seriously. "I'd want to create a comprehensive program covering the entire South Carolina coast. Not just restoration, but education, research, and policy advocacy. Partner with universities to train the next generation of restoration specialists. Establish seed banks for native species. Create demonstration sites that show communities how natural solutions can protect their homes and businesses." "How much would something like that require?" "To do it right, probably 2 to 3 million over 5 years. Enough to hire full-time scientists, purchase specialized equipment, and establish permanent research facilities." $2 to $3 million. Less than a quarter of what Julian expected to inherit from my estate, and infinitely more meaningful than anything he'd ever accomplished with the money I'd already given him. "Kit," I said, turning to face him fully, I want to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. He nodded, his expression growing serious at my tone. If you suddenly had access to significant funding more than you've ever imagined, would you be prepared to handle that responsibility? To make decisions about how millions of dollars should be spent for the greatest impact? Kit was quiet for a long moment, clearly processing the weight of my question. When he spoke, his voice carried his mother's thoughtfulness. I think the real question is whether I'd be prepared to surround myself with people who could guide those decisions responsibly, he said. I know enough to know what I don't know. Coastal restoration is my expertise, but financial management and organizational leadership are different skills entirely. And you'd be willing to learn those skills? Absolutely. Mom always said that privilege, whether it's education, opportunity, or resources, comes with the obligation to use it wisely. Sarah's words, spoken through her son, hit me with unexpected force. How long had it been since I'd thought about privilege as obligation rather than entitlement? When had I stopped seeing my wealth as a responsibility and started seeing it as simply what I deserved? Your mother was a wise woman, I said softly. She talked about you often, Kit replied, about how you supported her dreams even when other people thought photography was just a hobby. She said you understood that some work is important even when it doesn't make money. The memory surfaced unbidden. Sarah, 22 years old and determined to document the disappearing gala communities of the Sea Islands, while her parents insisted she pursue something more practical. I'd helped fund her first exhibition, watching her eyes shine with purpose as visitors engaged with her photographs. I'd forgotten about that, I admitted. She never did. She said you taught her that having money meant having the power to support things that mattered, not just things that were profitable. We continued walking through the restoration site, and Kit showed me the different stages of the project. Areas planted 6 months ago were already showing healthy growth, their roots stabilizing the sediment and providing habitat for small fish and crustaceans. The newest plantings looked fragile in comparison, but Kit explained how the established areas were already helping to protect the younger plants from wave action. It's like compound interest, he said, but for ecosystems. Every successful section makes the next section more likely to succeed. The analogy struck me as profound. Julian had always talked about money in terms of acquisition and accumulation, but Kit understood investment in its truest sense, putting resources towards something that would grow and benefit others over time. Kit, I said as we made our way back toward the parking area, I want to tell you something, but I need you to keep it confidential for now. He nodded, his expression attentive. I'm going through a divorce. It's complicated, and it's made me reconsider many aspects of my life, including how I want to use my resources. I'm sorry, he said simply. That must be incredibly difficult. It is, but it's also been clarifying in some ways. Julian, my husband, has never understood the kind of work you're doing. He sees money as something to be accumulated and spent on luxuries, not as a tool for creating lasting change. We reached our cars, and I turned to face him in the late afternoon light. I'm restructuring my estate and my charitable giving, I continued. I want to focus on work that will outlast my lifetime, projects that will continue making a difference long after I'm gone. I think what you're doing here represents exactly that kind of investment. Kit's eyes widened slightly, but he remained quiet, letting me continue. I can't make any specific commitments today, but I want you to start thinking about what Coastal Futures could accomplish with substantial backing. Real money, enough to hire staff and establish permanent programs. Eleanor, he said carefully, are you talking about the kind of funding that would change everything? I'm talking about the kind of funding that would allow you to change everything, I replied. But I need to know you're ready for that responsibility. He looked out over the marsh, where the volunteers were finishing their work for the day. Their voices carried across the water, young people energized by the knowledge that their afternoon's labor would contribute to something larger than themselves. I think about Mom sometimes when I'm out here, he said quietly, about how she used her camera to show people beauty they might otherwise miss. I'd want to do something similar, use whatever resources I had to help people see the value in protecting what we still have. And if that meant leaving this hands-on work to manage larger programs, then I'd do that. But I'd make sure the people doing the hands-on work had everything they needed to succeed. I smiled, recognizing Sarah's combination of idealism and pragmatism in her son's words. One more question, I said. If you had the power to completely reshape how environmental protection is funded in South Carolina, what would you do? Kit was quiet for several minutes, clearly taking the question seriously. I'd create an endowment large enough that the interest alone could fund ongoing restoration work, he said finally. Something permanent that couldn't be cut when political priorities changed. And I'd make sure it supported not just the science, but the communities that depend on these ecosystems. Environmental protection can't succeed if it ignores the people who live and work in these areas. That's a sophisticated answer. Mom taught me that good intentions aren't enough if you don't understand the complex realities involved. As I drove back toward Charleston, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: hope. Not hope for my marriage or my relationship with Camille, but hope for something larger. Hope that my wealth could serve a purpose Julian and Camille would never understand. Kit represented everything they were not: principled, dedicated to something beyond himself, worthy of trust. Tomorrow I would call Harlan and tell him to accelerate the will revision process. I would also ask him to draft documents establishing a substantial endowment for coastal futures, with Kit as the primary decision maker. Julian and Camille were planning to inherit my fortune. Instead, they would inherit the knowledge that their betrayal had redirected that fortune towards someone who would honor its potential. The irony was almost enough to make me smile. Mo's laughter echoed through my kitchen as she flipped through the latest issue of Charleston magazine, where Julian and I graced the society pages from last week's gala. The photograph showed us posing in front of the foundation's banner, my hand resting on his arm, both of us smiling with practiced perfection. "Look at this caption," she said, reading aloud. "Power couple Eleanor and Julian Carrington celebrate another successful fundraising effort. The Carringtons have raised over $3 million for local charities during their marriage." She looked up at me with dark amusement. "I wonder if they'll print a correction when the divorce is finalized." "They'll print whatever sells magazines," I replied, pouring myself a second cup of coffee. It was Saturday morning, and I'd invited Mo over to discuss what I'd started thinking of as my liberation strategy. "Have you heard from Julian since Thursday?" she asked, setting down the magazine. "He's been texting," I said, showing her my phone, wanting to discuss logistics and work out details amicably. "Very civilized of him." "And have you responded?" "I told him to have his attorney contact Harlan. Nothing else to discuss." Mo nodded approvingly. "Good. Don't give him any information he can use against you later." She paused, studying my face. "You look different though, more settled somehow." I considered how to explain the shift I'd felt since meeting with Kit. "I've been thinking about legacy," I said finally. "About what I want my money to accomplish after I'm gone." "Please tell me you're not planning anything dramatic." "Quite the opposite. I'm planning something very carefully calculated." I refilled her coffee cup and sat down across from her. "Mo, what would you say if I told you I was leaving everything to someone Julian has never met?" Her eyebrows shot up. "I'd say that sounds like the beginning of either a very good plan or a very bad decision. Which is it?" I told her about Kit, about the marsh restoration project, about his thoughtful responses to my questions about responsibility and stewardship. Mo listened without interruption, her expression growing more interested as I spoke. "So you're essentially creating an environmental empire and putting a 25-year-old in charge of it," she said when I finished. "I'm ensuring that my wealth serves a purpose Julian and Camille could never understand," I corrected. "Kit has vision, integrity, and most importantly, he's not motivated by greed. And you trust him with $12 million because he plants grass in swamps?" "I trust him because he reminds me why I started caring about philanthropy in the first place. Because he sees money as a tool for change, not as an end in itself." Mo was quiet for a moment, turning her coffee cup in slow circles on the table. "Eleanor, I understand the appeal of giving Julian and Camille a giant middle finger through your will, but are you certain this isn't just an elaborate revenge fantasy?" "It's not revenge," I said, though even as I spoke the words I wondered if they were entirely true. "It's reclamation. For years, I've been living a life that Julian shaped, supporting causes he thought were appropriate, maintaining an image he helped create. This is about returning to my own values. And if Kit turns out to be irresponsible with the money, then I'll have misjudged him. But Mo, I've spent 12 years watching Julian make financial decisions, and I can tell you that impressive credentials don't guarantee wisdom. Kit may be young, but he understands stewardship in a way Julian never has. My phone buzzed with a text from Harlan. Documents ready for review. Can you come in Monday morning? That's Harlan, I said, showing Mo the message. The new will is finished. Already? That was fast. I told him to prioritize it. Julian's attorney will probably start discovery proceedings soon, and I want everything legally locked down before they begin fishing for information. Mo leaned back in her chair, studying me with the direct gaze that had served her well in 30 years of interior design. You're really doing this. I really am. Then we need to talk strategy, she said, her tone shifting to business mode. Because if you're going to rewrite your entire estate plan, you need to think about the immediate implications, not just the long-term ones. I waited for her to continue. Julian expects to profit from this divorce, she said. He's probably already calculating how much he'll get in the settlement, plus what he thinks he'll inherit eventually. You need to manage his expectations carefully. What do you mean? I mean, don't let him know about the will changes until it's too late for him to do anything about them. Play the grieving wife. Let him think he's getting everything he wants. Meanwhile, you quietly restructure everything so that when the dust settles, he discovers his golden goose has flown the coop. The calculating nature of her suggestion appealed to me. Julian had spent months manipulating me. Perhaps it was time to return the favor. There's something else, I said. I want to establish a fund for Kit immediately, not just in the will. Something that gives him resources to expand his work while I'm still alive to see the results. How much are you thinking? $500,000. To start, enough to hire full-time staff and establish proper operations. Mo whistled softly. That's serious money for a young nonprofit. It's also a test, I admitted. I want to see how he handles significant resources before I commit to making him my primary heir. Smart. And it gives you leverage if Julian tries to challenge anything later. You can point to Kit's track record of responsible management. My phone rang, interrupting our planning session. Julian's name appeared on the screen, and I felt my stomach tighten reflexively. Answer it, Mo said quietly, but remember you're the grieving wife who just wants this to be over with minimal conflict. I took a breath and accepted the call. Hello, Julian. Eleanor. Thank you for taking my call. I know this is difficult for both of us, but I think we should meet to discuss how to handle the practical aspects of separating our lives. His voice carried the reasonable, professional tone I'd once found attractive. Now it sounded manipulative, calculated to make me feel like the emotional one, while he remained rational and controlled. I've told you to have your attorney contact Harlan, I said, keeping my voice steady. I know, and they're already in touch, but there are personal matters that don't require lawyers. The house, for instance, and how we want to handle the transition period. What transition period? Well, I assume you'll want time to decide what to do with the house. It's quite large for one person, and the maintenance costs are significant. I thought perhaps we could discuss selling it and splitting the proceeds. The audacity took my breath away. He wanted to sell my family's home, the house I'd inherited from my parents, where I'd planned to raise children, where generations of Blackwells had built their lives. The house isn't marital property, I said carefully. It was mine before we married. But we've made significant improvements together, Julian replied smoothly. The kitchen renovation, the pool installation, the guest house addition. I think any fair assessment would recognize my contribution to its current value. Mo, who could hear his voice through the phone, made a slicing motion across her throat, reminding me to end the conversation before I said something I'd regret. Julian, I really think these discussions should happen through our attorneys, I said. It's cleaner that way. Of course. You're right, but Eleanor, I hope you know I never wanted things to end this way. I genuinely hope we can remain friends. Friends. The word felt like a slap. He'd betrayed me with my own sister and now wanted us to be friends. I have to go, I said, and hung up before he could respond. What did he want? Mo asked. To sell my house and split the money, I said, my voice shaking with rage. To remain friends. That manipulative bastard, Mo said flatly. He's already calculating how to maximize his take from the divorce settlement. He has no legal claim to the house, I said. It's been in my family for 3 generations, but he might have a claim to the improvements you made during the marriage, especially if you used joint funds for the renovations. The thought of Julian profiting from the work I'd done to preserve my family's home filled me with cold fury. Every decision I'd made about the renovations had been about honoring the house's history while updating it for modern life. Julian had seen only opportunities to increase resale value. Mo, I said, my voice steady again, I want you to help me with something. Anything. I want to make anonymous donations to some of Julian and Camille's favorite causes. Not large amounts, just enough to seem generous. I want them to think I'm still the same person they've always manipulated. Mo's eyes lit up with understanding. Keep them comfortable while you dismantle their expectations. Exactly. What does Camille always complain about needing money for? Her boutique, Mo said immediately. That little shop downtown that never seems to turn a profit. Perfect. I'll have Harlan arrange an anonymous business loan at favorable terms. Camille will think she's finally found success through her own efforts. And Julian? I thought about his professional ambitions, his constant networking, his desire to be seen as successful. His favorite charity is the Charleston Bar Association's scholarship fund. I'll make a donation in his honor, something that will get his name in their newsletter and make him feel important. You're giving them just enough rope to hang themselves with, Mo observed. I'm giving them exactly what they think they want, while ensuring they'll never get what they're really after. Monday morning found me in Harlan's office, reviewing the final draft of my new will. The document was masterfully crafted, ironclad in its language and devastating in its implications for Julian and Camille. The trust structure is particularly elegant, Harlan explained, pointing to a complex paragraph near the end. Your estate will be held in trust for Kit's environmental work, but you retain complete control over distributions during your lifetime. If anything happens to Kit, the funds revert to established environmental organizations rather than returning to your bloodline. And there's no way to challenge this? Not successfully. We've documented your mental competency, your reasons for the changes, and your long-standing interest in environmental causes. Any challenge would have to prove undue influence or mental incapacity, and we have extensive evidence against both claims. I signed my name with deliberate care, knowing that each letter represented a final break from the life Julian had planned for us. There's one more thing, I said, setting down the pen. I want to establish an immediate fund for Kit's organization. $500,000, available within the week. Are you certain? That's a substantial commitment. I'm certain. I want to see what he does with significant resources. And Harlan, I want the donation to be anonymous for now. Let him think it came from another foundation or a private donor who wishes to remain unidentified. Very well. I'll arrange the transfer through a donor-advised fund to maintain your anonymity. As I left Harlan's office, I felt lighter than I had in months. The weight of pretending to be someone else's version of myself had lifted, replaced by the clarity of purpose I'd lost somewhere in the years of marriage and social obligations. Julian and Camille thought they were playing a long game, positioning themselves to inherit my wealth through patience and manipulation. They had no idea that the game had already ended, and they had lost completely. The only question now was how long it would take them to realize it. The elegant cream envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by hand to my front door. My name was written in Camille's familiar, flowing script across expensive letterstock that I recognized from the boutique stationery shop downtown, the same shop where I'd bought my own wedding invitations 12 years ago. Inside, embossed in gold lettering, was an invitation that made my coffee taste bitter. Mr. Julian Carrington and Miss Camille Blackwell request the pleasure of your company at their engagement celebration Saturday, the 28th of October, 7 o'clock in the evening. The Palmetto Room at Harbor House. I stared at the invitation for a full minute, processing the audacity. Harbor House was the historic venue I'd helped restore through a foundation grant 3 years ago. They were celebrating their betrayal in a building my money had saved. The irony was so perfect it was almost funny. Mo, I said into my phone. 5 minutes later, you're not going to believe this. Try me. Julian and Camille are having an engagement party, and they invited me. The silence on the other end stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Mo, I'm here. I'm just trying to process the level of delusion required to send that invitation. Do they actually think you'll attend? I think they're counting on me not attending. This way they can tell people they tried to include me that they're taking the high road despite our unfortunate situation. You're probably right. So obviously you're not going. I walked to my kitchen window, looking out at the garden where October sunlight filtered through the ancient oak trees. In 2 weeks, Julian and Camille would be toasting their future while believing they'd inherit my fortune. They had no idea that just yesterday, Kit had called to thank me through Harlan's carefully maintained anonymity for the donation that would allow him to hire 2 full-time marine biologists and purchase a research vessel. Actually, I said, slowly, I think I am going. Eleanor, no, that's exactly what they want, to parade their happiness in front of you while you play the part of the dignified, wounded ex-wife. What if I'm not dignified and wounded? What if I'm confident and untouchable? Mo was quiet for a moment. What are you planning? I'm planning to remind them that they're playing in my city, at a venue I helped fund, with people who've known me for decades. I want to see their faces when I walk into that room looking absolutely radiant. And what do you hope to accomplish? Intelligence gathering, I said. I want to hear what they're telling people about their relationship, their plans, their expectations. Information is power, and right now they think they have all the advantages. This could backfire spectacularly, or it could give me exactly what I need to ensure they never recover from what's coming. That afternoon, I drove to the boutique district on King Street, something I hadn't done for pleasure in months. Julian had always preferred that I shop at the established stores where his colleagues' wives shopped, maintaining our image as a respectable Charleston power couple. Today I wanted something that reflected who I was becoming rather than who I'd been. In a small shop tucked between a coffee house and an art gallery, I found the perfect dress, black silk with subtle beading that caught the light, elegant but not mourning, sophisticated but not trying too hard. The sales associate, a young woman with purple streaked hair and multiple piercings, nodded approvingly when I emerged from the dressing room. You look like someone who could take over the world, she said with a grin. That's exactly the impression I'm going for. Saturday evening arrived with unseasonable warmth, Charleston's October weather providing a perfect backdrop for an outdoor celebration. I arrived at Harbor House precisely 30 minutes after the invitation stated time, late enough to make an entrance, early enough to observe the dynamics before alcohol loosened tongues. The Palmetto Room glowed with candlelight and flower arrangements that must have cost more than many people's monthly salary. Camille had always had expensive tastes, though she'd never had the money to indulge them until recently. I wondered if Julian was funding this celebration with the money he'd transferred from our joint accounts. I paused at the entrance, scanning the crowd for familiar faces. Charleston's social circles were small and interconnected. Half the people in this room had attended events at my house over the years. The other half knew me by reputation, if not personally. Eleanor, Margaret Whitmore, appeared at my elbow almost immediately, her face a carefully composed mask of sympathy. How brave of you to come tonight. I'm sure this can't be easy. Actually, Margaret, I'm quite happy for them, I replied, with a smile that I hoped looked genuine. When people find their true calling in life, we should celebrate it. Margaret's eyebrows rose slightly at my choice of words, but before she could respond, I'd moved deeper into the crowd. The next 20 minutes provided a masterclass in Charleston social dynamics. People approached me with varying degrees of curiosity, sympathy, and barely concealed gossip hunger. I played my role perfectly, gracious, dignified, perhaps slightly mysterious about my own plans for the future. Eleanor, darling, cooed Patricia Chen, the society columnist for Charleston Living, you're handling this whole situation with such grace. I'm sure our readers would love to hear about your next chapter. Oh, Patricia, I'm focusing on some exciting new philanthropic ventures, I said, allowing just enough intrigue into my voice. Environmental restoration, sustainable development causes. That will make a real difference for future generations. How wonderful. And will you be staying in Charleston? This is my home, I said simply. My family's roots here go back generations. I can't imagine living anywhere else. I spotted Julian across the room, resplendent in a new tuxedo that probably cost more than Kit's monthly salary. He was holding court near the bar, regaling a small group with what appeared to be a humorous story. His confident posture and easy laughter suggested a man without a care in the world. Then our eyes met across the crowded room. The smile faltered on his face for just a moment before he recovered, raising his glass in a small salute that might have looked friendly to observers, but felt loaded with challenge. To me, I raised my own champagne flute in response, my smile never wavering. Eleanor, Camille appeared beside me as if materialized from air, stunning in a white cocktail dress that emphasized her youth and beauty. I wasn't sure you'd come. I wouldn't miss it, I replied, leaning in to kiss her cheek as if we were still loving sisters. "You look absolutely radiant." "Thank you." She glanced around nervously as if expecting me to cause a scene. "I know this must be strange for you." "Not strange at all. I think you and Julian are perfect for each other." The comment could be interpreted as generous or cutting, depending on the listener's perspective. Camille chose to hear generosity, her relief evident. "I hoped you'd understand," she said. "Julian and I never meant for this to happen. It just evolved naturally." "The best relationships often do," I agreed. "Tell me, are you planning to stay in Charleston after the wedding?" "Oh, yes. Julian's practice is here, and I'm finally getting the boutique off the ground. Did I tell you? I received the most amazing business loan last month. Anonymous investor, incredible terms. It's like the universe is finally supporting my dreams." I smiled, remembering the phone call to Harlan that had arranged that loan. How wonderful. The universe does work in mysterious ways. Julian approached us then, his arms sliding possessively around Camille's waist. "Eleanor, I have to say, you look spectacular tonight." "Thank you. You both do." I raised my glass slightly. "To new beginnings." "To new beginnings," they echoed, clinking their glasses against mine. Over the next hour, I circulated through the party, like an anthropologist studying a foreign culture. I listened to conversations, filed away observations, and gradually began to understand the narrative Julian and Camille had constructed around their relationship. According to the story they were telling, their connection had been instantaneous, but fought against out of loyalty to me. They'd tried to deny their feelings, but ultimately couldn't resist what they described as destiny. Julian spoke movingly about how Camille had awakened passions he'd forgotten he possessed, while Camille glowed as she described feeling truly understood for the first time in her life. It was a beautiful story, romantic and tragic and ultimately triumphant. It was also, I realized, largely calculated for public consumption. The real story emerged in fragments overheard during unguarded moments. "The foundation connections alone are worth millions," I heard Julian murmur to his law partner near the bar. "Camille's always been the creative one," another guest commented. "Eleanor was more the responsible sister, but Camille has that artistic spark." "He's trading up," someone whispered behind me. "Younger model, same family money." That last comment stopped me cold. Same family money. They believed Camille would inherit from me, that marrying her was simply a more pleasant path to the same financial destination. I was standing near the French doors leading to the terrace when I overheard the conversation that changed everything. "The timing couldn't be better," Julian was saying to someone I couldn't see. "Eleanor's been talking about updating her estate planning. Anyway, family wealth should stay in the family, don't you think?" "And if something happened to Eleanor tomorrow?" an unfamiliar male voice asked. "Well, Camille is her only living relative. Blood is thicker than water, as they say." "But what about the current will?" "Wills can be contested," Julian replied, smoothly, "especially when there are questions about undue influence or mental state during a difficult divorce." My blood turned to ice. They weren't just planning to inherit my money eventually, they were planning to challenge my will if I died before they could manipulate me into changing it. "Of course," the other voice continued, "it would be better if she simply rewrote everything voluntarily. Grief and isolation can make people very generous to family members. Camille's working on that angle," Julian said with a chuckle that made my skin crawl. "Sisters stick together, especially when one is going through a difficult time." I stepped back from the conversation, my mind racing. They had planned this even more thoroughly than I'd imagined. Not only were they expecting to inherit my wealth, but they had backup plans if I proved resistant to manipulation. The cruelest part was their assumption that I would turn to Camille for comfort in my isolation, that grief and loneliness would make me financially generous to my loving sister. They were counting on my emotional vulnerability to secure their financial future. I found myself at the bar, ordering another glass of champagne. I didn't want, using the time to regain my composure. When I turned around, I nearly collided with Christopher Henderson, an old friend of my father's, who'd known me since childhood. "Eleanor, my dear," he said warmly, "you're looking remarkably well for someone going through such a difficult time." "Thank you, Mr. Henderson. I'm discovering that difficult times can also be clarifying." "How so?" "They help you understand who people really are," I said, glancing across the room at Julian and Camille, who were now posing for photographs near an elaborate floral arrangement. and what they really want from you. Mr. Henderson followed my gaze and nodded slowly. Your father always said that money was like a strong light. It revealed character by showing whether people were drawn to the light itself or to what it illuminated. He was a wise man. Indeed, he also believed that the best revenge was a life well lived. He studied my face carefully. I suspect he'd be proud of how you're handling this situation. I hope so. I stayed another hour, long enough to witness Julian's toast to their future together, a speech that managed to be both touching and thoroughly self-serving. He spoke about finding his soulmate, about the courage to follow one's heart, about the importance of family and love and building a life with someone who truly understood you. He never once mentioned me by name, but his references to moving beyond the past and embracing authentic happiness made it clear that I represented everything he was glad to leave behind. Camille's response was shorter but equally revealing. She spoke about finally feeling worthy of love, about finding someone who saw her potential instead of her mistakes, about building a future based on shared dreams rather than obligations. The applause was enthusiastic, and why shouldn't it be? They were beautiful, they were in love, and their story had all the elements of a perfect romance, except for the part where they were planning to defraud me. I left during the dancing, slipping away without formal goodbyes, satisfied that my mission had been accomplished. I'd gathered the intelligence I needed, and more importantly, I'd demonstrated that I was no threat to their plans. They would remember me as gracious in defeat, dignified in my acceptance of their happiness. They had no idea that I'd already won a game they didn't even know we were playing. As I drove home through Charleston's historic streets, I felt a profound sense of satisfaction. In 2 weeks, Kit would receive another anonymous donation, this one large enough to establish the permanent research facility he dreamed of. In 6 months, when Julian and Camille tried to access what they believed would be their inheritance, they would discover that Eleanor Blackwell had left them exactly what they deserved, nothing. But tonight, they could dance and dream and plan their golden future. After all, even the condemned deserve a last meal. The call came at 7:30 on a Wednesday morning, 3 weeks after the engagement party. I was in my garden, drinking coffee and watching the sunrise paint my mother's roses gold, when my phone buzzed with Harlan's number. Eleanor, I apologize for calling so early, but something has come to my attention that requires immediate discussion. The gravity in his voice made me set down my coffee cup. What's happened? I received a call yesterday from Patricia Mills at First Charleston Bank. It seems Julian attempted to access one of your accounts using what he claimed were updated power of attorney documents. My blood chilled. Which account? The Conservation Trust Fund, the one established for land preservation projects. Patricia became suspicious when Julian couldn't answer basic questions about the trust's purpose and called me for verification. I stood up, pacing across the brick patio my father had laid 30 years ago. What kind of questions couldn't he answer? Simple ones. The trust's founding date, the specific conservation goals, the names of the board members. Julian claimed you'd updated the documentation but hadn't informed him of the details yet. And Patricia didn't believe him? Patricia Mills has been handling Blackwell family banking for 15 years. She knows you don't make impulsive changes to established trusts, and she knows you'd never exclude Julian from important financial discussions during your marriage. Harlan paused. She also noted that the power of attorney documents Julian presented looked recently printed, despite bearing dates from 2 years ago. The audacity was staggering. Julian wasn't just planning to challenge my will after my death, he was attempting to access my money now, while we were still married, using forged documents. How much money was in that account? I asked, though I dreaded the answer. $800,000. The full balance of the Land Conservation Fund. $800,000. Not enough to retire on, but certainly enough to fund a very comfortable lifestyle while Julian and Camille waited for me to die or become vulnerable enough to manipulate. Harlan, I need to see you immediately, and I want you to audit every account Julian has ever had access to. I've already begun that process. Can you be here in an hour? I'll be there in 30 minutes. Harlan's office felt different. That morning, the familiar wood-paneled walls and leather-bound books, seeming more like a war room than a place of legal counsel. Documents covered his desk in neat stacks, each pile representing a different aspect of Julian's financial machinations. It's worse than we initially thought, Harlan said without preamble, gesturing for me to sit in the chair across from his. Desk. The Conservation Trust incident was just the most recent attempt. Julian has been systematically testing access to various accounts for the past 2 months. He handed me a printed spreadsheet. These are all the inquiries made using your name or Julian's in the past 90 days. Some were successful, others were flagged by alert bank officers. I scanned the list, my anger building with each line item. Julian had attempted to access my personal checking account, my investment portfolio, and 3 different trust funds. The successful withdrawals totaled nearly $60,000. How was he able to access anything? Joint account privileges in most cases. For others, he used copies of legitimate documents from previous transactions, claiming the paperwork was for routine updates or tax preparation. And the banks just accepted this? Harlan's expression darkened. Julian can be very persuasive, and unfortunately, many financial institutions don't have protocols for detecting sophisticated internal fraud. When a well-dressed attorney presents official-looking documents and speaks confidently about legal procedures, people tend to comply. I set down the spreadsheet, my hands shaking with rage. He's been stealing from me. Technically, given your joint account privileges, most of these transactions fall into a legal gray area during marriage. However, the forged power of attorney documents cross the line into criminal fraud. What do? First, we immediately revoke all of Julian's access to your accounts. Every bank, every investment firm, every trust administrator needs to be notified that he no longer has authorization to conduct business on your behalf. And second, we document everything. Financial fraud during divorce proceedings can significantly impact settlement negotiations. If Julian is stealing money now, a judge will take that into consideration when dividing assets. Harlan opened another folder. There's something else. I had my investigator look into Julian's recent financial activities. He's been spending money at an alarming rate. He handed me a series of bank statements. A new Rolex, custom suits from a tailor in New York, a wine collection worth $15,000, and most interesting of all, a down payment on a BMW for Camille. He bought her a car, a $70,000 convertible. The purchase was made 2 weeks after he started accessing your accounts. The pattern was clear. Julian was using my money to fund his courtship of my sister, buying her expensive gifts to secure her loyalty while planning to steal even more through fraudulent documents. Harlan, I want you to hire the best forensic accountant in Charleston. I want every financial transaction Julian has made in the past year scrutinized. If he's been planning this theft systematically, there will be other evidence. Already done. Rebecca Torres from Miller & Associates will begin her audit tomorrow. She specializes in cases involving financial misconduct during divorce proceedings. Good. What else do we need to do? Harlan leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers in the gesture I'd seen him make when considering complex legal strategies. Eleanor, I think it's time to consider taking this beyond just civil remedies. Financial fraud involving forged documents is a criminal matter. We could file charges. The thought of Julian in handcuffs, his carefully constructed image crumbling under public scrutiny, held tremendous appeal. But I forced myself to think strategically rather than emotionally. Would that help or hurt our position in the divorce proceedings? It could go either way. Criminal charges would certainly pressure Julian to accept a less favorable settlement, but they might also prompt him to challenge everything more aggressively. What about Camille? Is there any evidence she was involved in the fraud? Not directly. The forged documents were submitted by Julian alone, and the bank records show only his signature on withdrawal requests. However, the timing of his increased spending corresponds exactly with their relationship becoming serious. A prosecutor might argue that Camille provided motivation for the theft, even if she didn't participate directly. I considered this information, weighing my options. Criminal charges would provide immediate satisfaction and public vindication, but they might also interfere with my larger plan to redirect my wealth toward Kit's environmental work. Let's hold off on criminal charges for now, I decided. But I want all the evidence documented and ready to present if Julian becomes more aggressive. Understood. In the meantime, I've prepared new signature cards for all your accounts and updated security protocols. Julian will discover his access has been revoked the next time he attempts any transactions. How long before he realizes what's happened? Probably within a few days. He seems to have been making regular small withdrawals, testing the waters before attempting larger thefts. That afternoon, I sat in my study, reviewing the forensic accountant's preliminary findings. Rebecca Torres had worked with remarkable speed, uncovering a pattern of financial manipulation that stretched back nearly a year. Julian had been preparing for this divorce much longer than I'd realized. The earliest suspicious transactions, dated to last December, small transfers and account inquiries that suggested he'd been building a comprehensive understanding of my financial holdings. Most disturbing was the discovery of a new business account opened in January under the name Carrington Holdings LLC. Julian had deposited my stolen money into this account, along with funds from his own practice, creating what appeared to be legitimate business income. It's actually quite sophisticated, Rebecca had explained during our afternoon meeting. By mixing stolen funds with legitimate income, he's created a paper trail that would be difficult to trace without detailed forensic analysis. How much money are we talking about in total? Based on what I've found so far, approximately $130,000 over the past 10 months. But these are just the transactions I can definitively identify as questionable. There may be more. $130,000. Julian had been systematically stealing from me for nearly a year, funding his new life with Camille. Using my own money. My phone rang, interrupting my review of the financial documents. The caller ID showed Kit's number, and I felt a welcome relief from the afternoon's ugly discoveries. Hi Kit, how are things at the Marsh? Eleanor, I'm calling with incredible news, he said, his voice bubbling with excitement. We just received notification of another major donation to $100,000 from the same anonymous donor who funded our earlier expansion. I smiled, remembering the call I'd made to Harlan that morning, instructing him to increase Kit's funding in light of Julian's theft. Every dollar Julian stole from me would be matched and donated to someone who would use it responsibly. That's wonderful news. What will you do with the additional funding? We're going to establish the marine research station we've been dreaming about. A permanent facility where scientists can study coastal ecosystem restoration techniques and train the next generation of environmental specialists. It sounds like you're building something that will last for generations. That's exactly the goal. This anonymous donor seems to understand that environmental protection requires long-term thinking and sustainable funding. If only he knew how personal my commitment to long-term thinking had become. After hanging up with Kit, I returned to my financial documents, but my perspective had shifted. Julian's theft was certainly infuriating, but it was also clarifying. Every dollar he stole reinforced my decision to cut him out of my will. Every fraudulent document he created provided additional justification for my choice to redirect my wealth towards someone worthy of trust. Julian and Camille thought they were playing a sophisticated game, manipulating me while positioning themselves for a financial windfall. They had no idea that their own greed was providing me with the evidence I'd need to destroy their plans. Completely. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Eleanor, this is Camille. Can we meet for lunch tomorrow? I think we need to talk. I stared at the message for several minutes, recognizing the next phase of their strategy. Julian's financial manipulations had been discovered, which meant they needed to accelerate their timeline. Camille was being deployed to work on my emotions, to position herself as my loving sister who only wanted to rebuild our relationship. I typed back, of course. How about the Ocean House at noon? The Ocean House was perfect for this conversation public. Enough to prevent any dramatic outbursts, elegant enough to maintain the civilized facade we'd both need to preserve. Tomorrow, I would sit across from my sister and listen to her explain why family should stick together during difficult times. She would probably apologize for the pain their relationship had caused me, express hope that we could find a way forward together, and perhaps mention her concerns about my isolation and need for emotional support. She would have no idea that I'd already seen through their entire strategy, that every word she spoke would simply confirm my decision to leave her nothing. Julian had started this game by believing he could manipulate me through theft and forgery. Tomorrow, Camille would try to continue it through emotional manipulation and false sisterly love. Neither of them understood that the game was already over, and they had lost everything. The Ocean House dining room buzzed with the gentle conversation of Charleston's lunch crowd, the kind of refined atmosphere where secrets were traded over lobster salad and bourbon punch. I arrived 5 minutes early, selecting a corner table, with a view of the harbor, but positioned to observe the room's comings and goings. Old habits from years of social navigation always know who's watching, always control the environment. Camille appeared in the doorway at precisely noon, scanning the room until her eyes found mine. She looked stunning, as always, in a flowing sundress that emphasized her youth and a delicate gold necklace I didn't recognize. Julian's money at work, no doubt. Eleanor, she said, approaching the table with the cautious grace of someone walking into enemy territory. Thank you for meeting me. Of course. I stood to embrace her, the gesture feeling like theater for the benefit of other diners who might be watching. You look wonderful. That necklace is beautiful. Thank you. Her hand moved unconsciously to touch the pendant. It was a gift from Julian, obviously, though she didn't specify. Probably purchased with money stolen from my accounts. We ordered. She chose the salmon. I selected the crab cakes and made polite conversation about the weather, the restaurant's recent renovation, anything except the elephant sitting at our table. Camille seemed nervous, fidgeting with her water glass and avoiding direct eye contact. Camille, I said finally after our salads arrived, you mentioned needing to talk. What's on your mind? She took a breath, composing herself with visible effort. I wanted to talk about us. About our family. What about it? I know things have been complicated since since our relationship began. I know I've hurt you, and I hate that our personal situation has damaged what we've always had as sisters. The words sounded rehearsed, as if she'd practiced this conversation in front of a mirror. I wondered if Julian had coached her on specific phrases to use. You haven't damaged anything, I replied carefully. You and Julian fell in love. These things happen, but I can see how isolated you've become since the separation. You've always been so social, so engaged with the community, and now, she gestured vaguely. I worry about you being alone in that big house. There it was, the opening move in what I now recognized as a carefully orchestrated campaign. Position Eleanor as lonely and vulnerable. Establish Camille as the caring sister offering support and connection. I'm hardly alone, I said with a slight smile. I have my work with the foundation, my friends, my responsibilities. Of course, but it's not the same as having family nearby. And Eleanor, I want you to know that whatever happens between Julian and me, you're still my sister. That will never change. I appreciate that, Camille. She leaned forward, her expression earnest. I've been thinking about how we could spend more time together. Maybe I could move into the guest house for a while, help you through this transition. We could support each other the way we did when we were younger. The audacity took my breath away. She wanted to move into my property, presumably to have daily access to monitor my emotional state and influence my decisions. It was manipulation disguised as sisterly love, and it was almost perfectly executed. That's a thoughtful offer, I said, taking a sip of my iced tea to buy time, but I think I need some space to process everything that's happened. I understand, of course, but Eleanor, I want you to know that you can count on me. Whatever you need, whatever decisions you're facing, I'm here for you. Whatever decisions you're facing. The phrase hung in the air between us, loaded with implications about wills and inheritances and the financial choices a lonely widow might make. What kind of decisions? I asked innocently. Camille hesitated, clearly recognizing that she was approaching dangerous territory. Well, practical things. The house is so large for one person, and the maintenance costs must be significant. Julian mentioned that you might be considering making some changes. Julian mentioned. Of course he had. They'd discuss my presumed vulnerability, my potential willingness to downsize or simplify my life in ways that might benefit them financially. Julian talks to you about my personal business? Not in detail, Camille said quickly. He cares about you too, Eleanor. We both do. We want to make sure you're not making any hasty decisions during what must be a very emotional time. There was the crux of their strategy, laid bare with stunning transparency. They were positioning themselves as my protectors, concerned about my emotional state and eager to help me avoid hasty decisions that might not align with their interests. What kind of hasty decisions are you worried about? I pressed. Camille's composure cracked slightly. I don't know exactly. It's just that people going through major life changes sometimes make choices they later regret. I wouldn't want you to give away too much to charity or cut ties with family because you're angry right now. Give away too much to charity. Cut ties with family. She was practically reading from a script about inheritance planning, warning me against the exact decisions I'd already made. Camille, I said, setting down my fork and looking directly at her, Are you concerned about my will? The color drained from her face. What? No, that's not what this is about, isn't it? Eleanor, I'm your sister. I'm worried about your well-being, not your money. The lie was so transparent it was almost insulting. I wondered if she'd practiced that line too, if Julian had coached her on how to look hurt and offended when confronted with the truth. Of course, I said smoothly. I apologize if I misunderstood your concern. Camille relaxed slightly, apparently believing she'd navigated past a dangerous moment. I just want us to be close again, the way we were before all this complicated everything. When were we ever close, Camille? The question surprised her. What do you mean? I mean, when in our adult lives were we actually close? You dropped out of college and disappeared for 2 years. When you came back, you needed money for rent. Then you needed money for the boutique, startup costs. Then you needed money when the boutique nearly failed. Our relationship has always been about me giving you things you needed. That's not fair, isn't it? Name one time in the past 10 years when you contacted me just to talk, when you weren't asking for something. Camille stared at me, her mouth opening and closing as she searched for an example that didn't exist. Eleanor, that's not. I mean, you were always so busy, so successful. I didn't want to bother you with my problems, but you had no problem bothering me for solutions to your problems. You're twisting everything, she said, her voice rising slightly before she caught herself and glanced around the dining room. I came here today to try to rebuild our relationship, and you're attacking me. I'm simply being honest about what our relationship has actually been. Fine. Camille straightened in her chair, her mask of sisterly concern finally slipping, to reveal something harder underneath. You want honesty? Here's honesty. Yes, I've needed your help over the years. Yes, you've always been the successful one, the responsible one, the one everyone admires. Do you have any idea what it's like to be the family disappointment? Is that how you see yourself? It's how everyone sees me. Poor little Camille, can't hold a job, can't maintain a relationship, can't do anything right. Always needing big sister Eleanor to bail her out. There was real pain in her voice now. Years of resentment finally bubbling to the surface. For a moment, I felt a flicker of the sympathy that had driven me to support her for so many years. Camille, do you know what it was like growing up in your shadow? You were the smart one, the pretty one, the one who made mom and dad proud. I was the afterthought, the one who could never quite measure up. That's not true. It is true. And the worst part was that you never even noticed. You were so busy being perfect that you never saw how your perfection made everyone else feel inadequate. The accusation stung because there was truth in it. I had been focused on achievement, on meeting expectations, on building the life I thought I was supposed to want. I'd never considered how my success might feel to someone who struggled to find her place in the world. But Julian sees me, Camille continued, her voice gaining strength. He sees my potential, my creativity, my worth. He doesn't compare me to you or expect me to be someone I'm not. And what does he expect you to be? Happy, loved, valued for who I am instead of criticized for who I'm not. I almost laughed at the irony. Julian, who had spent 12 years trying to reshape me into his ideal wife, who had criticized my foundation work as too time-consuming and my political views as too liberal, was presenting himself to Camille as someone who accepted her unconditionally. Camille, do you know why Julian's previous relationships ended? What does that have to do with anything? He told me about his ex-girlfriend from law school, Sarah Mitchell. He said she was too ambitious, too focused on her career. He broke up with her because she wouldn't prioritize their relationship over her work. So, and before that in college, there was Jennifer Walsh. He said she was too emotional, too needy. He found her constant desire for reassurance exhausting. Camille's expression had grown defensive. People change, Eleanor. Maybe Julian learned from those relationships. Or maybe he tells each woman what she needs to hear until he gets what he wants from her. What he wants from me is love. What he wants from you, I said quietly, is access to the Blackwell family fortune. The words landed like a physical blow. Camille's face went white, then red, her hands clenching into fists on the table. That's a horrible thing to say. It's also true. Julian has been systematically stealing money from my accounts for the past year. Did you know that? You're lying. I pulled out my phone and showed her a photo of the bank statement documenting Julian's attempted theft from the Conservation Trust. $800,000, Camille. He tried to steal $800,000 using forged documents. She stared at the phone screen, her breathing becoming rapid and shallow. The BMW he bought you was purchased with money stolen from my accounts, I continued. That necklace you're wearing, the engagement party expenses, probably half the gifts. He's given you all funded with money he stole from me. Stop it. He's been planning this for months, Camille. The divorce, the relationship with you, the attempts to access my money. You think you found love, but you actually found a con artist who realized that sleeping with my sister was easier than staying married to me. Stop it. Camille's voice cracked like a whip, loud enough to draw stares from nearby tables. You're just jealous because someone finally chose me over you. I'm not jealous, Camille. I'm trying to warn you. Warn me about what? That the man I love actually loves me? That for once in my life, I'm not living in your shadow? Warn you that when Julian discovers he's not inheriting my money, he'll drop you faster than he dropped his previous girlfriend. Camille stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. You're pathetic, Eleanor. You can't stand that Julian chose me, so you're making up lies about stolen money and forged documents. The police reports are public record, I said, calmly. Feel free to verify the details yourself. I don't need to verify anything. I know Julian, and I know you. You've always been controlling and manipulative, and now you're trying to destroy my happiness because you can't have what I have. And what exactly do you think you have? I have a man who loves me for myself, not for my family name or my trust fund. I have a future built on real emotion instead of social convenience. I looked at my sister, this beautiful, wounded, delusional woman who was about to marry a man who saw her as a means to an end, and felt the last of my familial obligation drain away. Camille, I said softly, you should know that I've updated my will. You're no longer a beneficiary. The color drained from her face so completely I thought she might faint. What? My estate will go to environmental causes when I die. Coastal restoration, specifically. You and Julian will inherit nothing from me. You can't do that. I can, and I have. The documents were signed and witnessed 3 weeks ago. Camille sank back into her chair, her world visibly crumbling around her. Eleanor, please. You're angry right now, but family is forever. Blood is thicker than water. Blood is just biology, Camille. Family is about loyalty, love, and trust. You chose Julian over family the moment you started sleeping with my husband. Please, she whispered, tears starting to flow down her cheeks. Don't let your anger destroy our future. I'm not destroying anything. I'm simply choosing where my life's work will continue after I'm gone. It will continue through people who understand stewardship instead of people who understand only greed. Camille's grief transformed into rage in the space of a heartbeat. She stood again, this time leaning over the table toward me, her voice low and venomous. You sanctimonious bitch. You think you're so much better than everyone else, don't you? Well, here's something for you to think about. Julian was right about you. You're cold, you're controlling, and you've never made anyone happy in your entire life. And yet, I said, placing my napkin on the table and standing, I'm the one he married for money, and you're the one he's using to try to steal it. I placed 2 20s on the table to cover lunch, and picked up my purse. Goodbye, Camille. I hope Julian makes you as happy as you deserve to be. I walked out of the ocean house without looking back, leaving my sister sitting alone at our table with the ruins of her carefully planned manipulation attempts scattered around her like broken glass. Outside, Charleston's afternoon heat felt clean and honest after the poisonous atmosphere of our conversation. I drove home slowly, taking the long way through the historic district, processing what had just happened. The sister I'd supported and protected for decades was gone, replaced by someone I barely recognized. Someone willing to betray family for money, willing to participate in theft and fraud, willing to destroy relationships for personal gain. But in losing a sister, I'd gained something more valuable, absolute clarity about the choices I'd made. There would be no guilt now, no second guessing, no sentimental regrets about cutting Camille out of my will. When I arrived home, I called Harlan immediately. It's time, I told him. File the papers for Julian's arrest. I want him in handcuffs by tomorrow morning. The Charleston County Sheriff's Department called at 6:47 a.m. on Friday morning to inform me that Julian had been taken into custody. I was already awake, sitting in my kitchen with coffee and the morning paper, waiting for the call I knew would come. Mrs. Carrington, this is Detective Sarah Rodriguez. We've arrested your husband on charges of attempted financial fraud and forgery. You'll need to come in to provide a formal statement at your earliest convenience. Of course. What time would work best? Could you be here by 9? We'd like to process this quickly, given the high-profile nature of the case. High profile? Of course it would be. Julian Carrington, respected attorney and husband of philanthropist Eleanor Blackwell, arrested for financial fraud. The Charleston legal community thrived on gossip, and this story would feed them for months. I'll be there at 9. I hung up and immediately called Mo, who answered on the second ring despite the early hour. Please tell me you're calling with good news, she said without preamble. Julian was arrested an hour ago. Holy shit. Sorry, I know it's early for profanity, but holy shit, Eleanor. How do you feel? I considered the question seriously. How did I feel? Not triumphant exactly, though there was satisfaction in seeing consequences finally catch up with Julian's actions. Not vindicated, though the arrest certainly validated my suspicions about his character. I feel like justice is finally working, I said. And I feel free. Free how? Free from the pretense that Julian and I might work things out amicably. Free from wondering if I was being too harsh in my judgment of him. Free from any obligation to consider his feelings when making decisions about my life. So what happens now? I give my statement to the police, then I call Kit and tell him about a very large anonymous donation that's about to transform his entire organization. How large? Large enough to establish the coastal restoration program he's dreamed of. Large enough to prove that Julian's arrest was the best thing that could have happened to the environment in South Carolina. Mo laughed, the sound carrying genuine delight. You're going to turn Julian's greed into something beautiful, aren't you? That's exactly what I'm going to do. At 9 o'clock sharp, I walked into the Charleston County Sheriff's Department, dressed in a navy suit that projected both respectability and authority. Detective Rodriguez was a compact woman in her 40s with intelligent eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor that reminded me of Mo. Mrs. Carrington, thank you for coming in. I know this must be difficult for you. Actually, Detective, I'm relieved that Julian's criminal behavior is finally being addressed. She raised an eyebrow at my directness but simply nodded and led me to a small conference room where Harlan was already waiting with a stack of documents. Eleanor, he said, standing to greet me, I've provided Detective Rodriguez with all the financial evidence we've compiled. The case is quite straightforward. For the next 2 hours, I walked the detective through Julian's pattern of theft and fraud. The attempted access to the Conservation Trust, the forged power of attorney documents, the systematic draining of joint accounts, and the creation of false business records to hide stolen money. The total amount stolen approaches $150,000, I explained, but the attempted theft of the Conservation Trust would have brought that number to nearly $1 million. And you had no knowledge of these activities while they were occurring? None whatsoever? Julian handled his own financial affairs, and I trusted him to respect the boundaries of our joint accounts. Detective Rodriguez made notes as I spoke, occasionally asking for clarification about dates or amounts. Her questions were professional and thorough, but I could see the disgust in her eyes as the scope of Julian's betrayal became clear. Mrs. Carrington, I have to ask, do you believe your sister Camille was aware of these illegal activities? I'd been expecting this question, and had prepared my answer carefully. I have no direct evidence of Camille's knowledge or participation in the financial fraud. However, she was certainly the beneficiary of Julian's theft, as evidenced by the expensive gifts he purchased for her using stolen money. Would you be willing to testify if this case goes to trial? Absolutely. And Detective Harlan interjected, Mrs. Carrington has additional evidence that might interest you. He handed her a folder I hadn't seen before. Julian attempted to contact several of Eleanor's financial advisors yesterday after his banking access was revoked. He claimed there had been a misunderstanding and requested emergency access to her accounts, even after he knew his activities had been discovered. It appears so. Either he believed he could talk his way out of the situation, or he was desperate enough to keep trying despite the obvious risks. Detective Rodriguez shook her head. In my experience, financial fraud cases often escalate exactly this way. The perpetrator becomes so focused on the money that they lose sight of the legal consequences. After finishing my statement, I walked out of the sheriff's department into bright October sunshine. Charleston looked different, somehow cleaner. more hopeful, as if Julian's arrest had lifted a shadow I hadn't realized was covering everything. My phone was buzzing with messages. Word traveled fast in Charleston's interconnected social circles, and news of Julian's arrest was already spreading through the legal community like wildfire. The first text was from Margaret Whitmore. "Eleanor, darling, I just heard the most shocking news. Are you all right?" The second was from Patricia Chen. "Mrs. Carrington, I'm so sorry to hear about your troubles. Would you be available for a brief interview about your reaction to today's events?" The third was from a number I didn't recognize. "This is Amanda Walsh from Channel 7 News. We'd like to speak with you about your husband's arrest." I deleted all the messages without responding and drove straight home, where I found 3 news vans parked on the street outside my gate. Reporters called out questions as I passed, their voices a cacophony of invasive curiosity. "Mrs. Carrington, how long have you suspected your husband of financial impropriety? Is it true that Mr. Carrington was stealing money to fund an affair? What's your response to allegations that you've cut your sister out of your will?" I kept my eyes straight ahead and my expression neutral, offering no comments as I drove through my gate and activated the security system. The last thing I needed was to feed the media circus with emotional reactions or defensive statements. Inside the safety of my home, I poured myself a glass of wine despite the early hour and called Kit. "Eleanor, I was just about to call you," he said, his voice filled with excitement. "You're not going to believe what happened this morning." "Tell me." "We received notification of the largest single donation in our organization's history. $2 million from an anonymous donor, specifically designated for coastal ecosystem restoration." $2 million. Harlan had moved quickly to execute my instructions. "That's incredible, Kit. What will you do with that kind of funding?" "Everything we've dreamed of and more. We can establish permanent research facilities, hire a full-time scientific staff, create educational programs for coastal communities, and fund restoration projects up and down the entire South Carolina coast." "It sounds like your anonymous donor believes deeply in your mission. I can't imagine who would make such a generous gift, but I promise you, Eleanor, we'll use every penny responsibly. This donation will change everything, not just for our organization, but for coastal conservation throughout the Southeast." "I'm sure it will. And Kit, I want you to know that you've impressed me tremendously over the past few months. Your vision, your integrity, your commitment to meaningful work, it gives me hope for the future." "Thank you. That means more to me than you know." After hanging up with Kit, I sat in my study, looking out at the garden where I'd spent so many hours over the years. The roses were beginning their fall bloom, and the ancient oak trees cast shifting patterns of light and shadow across the lawn. For the first time in months, I felt genuinely at peace. Julian was in custody, facing the consequences of his choices. Camille had revealed her true character and could no longer manipulate me through false sisterly concern, and most importantly, my wealth was already flowing towards someone who would use it to create lasting, positive change. My phone rang, and Harlan's name appeared on the screen. "Eleanor, I thought you should know Julian's attorney just called requesting a meeting to discuss plea options." "Already?" "Apparently Julian is quite concerned about the media attention. A trial would involve extensive public scrutiny of his financial activities and personal relationships. His lawyer seems to think a plea agreement might be preferable." "What kind of plea agreement?" "Full restitution of stolen funds, guilty. Plea to reduce charges, probably some jail time, but less than he'd face if convicted at trial. It would also likely include a provision prohibiting him from practicing law in South Carolina." The thought of Julian losing his law license, the professional identity he'd worked so hard to build, felt like appropriate justice. He'd used his legal knowledge to facilitate theft and fraud. Losing the right to practice law was a natural consequence. "What do you recommend?" "I think we should listen to what they're proposing. A plea agreement would resolve the criminal case quickly and allow you to move forward with your life without the stress of a lengthy trial. And it would mean Julian admits his guilt publicly." "Exactly. No claims of innocence. No attempts to blame others, no media campaign to restore his reputation. A guilty plea is a complete acknowledgement of wrongdoing." "Schedule the meeting," I said. "I want to look Julian in the eye when he admits what he's done." That evening, I received a call from an unexpected source, Rebecca Torres, the forensic accountant who'd been auditing Julian's financial activities. "Mrs. Carrington, I have some additional information that might interest you." In the course of reviewing Mr. Carrington's business records, I discovered something quite revealing about his relationship with your sister. What did you find? Text messages and emails between Mr. Carrington and Miss Blackwell discussing your estate planning. It appears they've been coordinating their efforts to influence your inheritance decisions for several months. My blood chilled. What kind of coordination? Detailed discussions about your emotional state, strategies for gaining your trust, and specific plans for challenging your will if necessary. Miss Blackwell appears to have been much more involved in the financial manipulation than we initially suspected. Do you have copies of these communications? Everything is documented and admissible as evidence. Mr. Carrington apparently believed his phone records would remain private, so he was quite explicit about their plans. Rebecca, I want you to provide all of this information to Detective Rodriguez immediately. If Camille was actively participating in a conspiracy to defraud me, she should face the same consequences as Julian. Understood. I'll have everything to the detective by tomorrow morning. After hanging up, I poured myself another glass of wine and walked out onto my back veranda. The sun was setting over Charleston Harbor, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples that reflected off the water like scattered gems. Julian and Camille had thought they were so clever, planning their manipulation with the precision of a military campaign. They'd coordinated their approaches, shared intelligence about my emotional vulnerabilities, and calculated exactly how to position themselves for maximum financial benefit. They'd made only one crucial error. They'd underestimated me completely. Tomorrow, Julian would likely accept a plea agreement that would destroy his career and result in criminal conviction. Next week, Camille might find herself facing criminal charges as a co-conspirator in his fraud schemes. And Kit would continue building the coastal restoration program that would be my true legacy, using money that Julian and Camille had believed would someday be theirs. I raised my wine glass to the sunset, toasting the justice that was finally, inexorably falling into place. To new beginnings, I said aloud, echoing the toast Julian and Camille had made at their engagement party. They'd Part 9. The True Air. The morning Charleston Post arrived with Julian's mugshot on the front page, his usually perfect hair disheveled and his expression a mixture of shock and indignation. The headline read, "Prominent Attorney Arrested for Fraud." Below it, a smaller headline added, "Blackwell Foundation Heiress Cooperates with Investigation." I folded the newspaper and set it aside, focusing instead on the letter I was writing to Kit. After 3 weeks of watching Julian's case unfold in the media, after seeing Camille charged as a co-conspirator and released on bail after enduring endless phone calls from reporters and society columnists, it was time to take the final step in my transformation. It was time to tell Kit the truth. Dear Kit, I'm writing to ask if you would join me for lunch this Saturday at my home. There are some things I need to discuss with you about your work, your future, and the anonymous donations your organization has been receiving. I believe it's time for honesty between us. With great affection, Eleanor. I sealed the letter in an envelope and asked James to deliver it personally to Kit's office at the Marine Research Station. Then I called Mo. "Are you sure you're ready for this conversation?" she asked when I explained my plans. "Once you tell him the truth about the donations and the will, everything changes." "Everything has already changed," I replied. "Julian pled guilty yesterday. He'll serve 18 months in federal prison and pay full restitution. His law license has been permanently revoked. Camille is likely to accept a plea agreement that will require her to repay the money she received from Julian's theft and perform community service." "And how do you feel about all of that?" I considered the question just as I had when Detective Rodriguez first called about Julian's arrest. I feel like justice has been served. But more importantly, I feel like I'm finally free to build the future I actually want instead of the one I thought I was supposed to want. And that future includes Kit as your heir? That future includes Kit as the steward of resources that can make a real difference in the world. He's proven himself over these past months, Mo. The way he's handled the anonymous donations, the vision he's developed for coastal restoration, the responsibility he's shown with significant funding. He's everything Julian pretended to be. Saturday arrived with the crisp clarity that only October in Charleston could provide. I spent the morning preparing lunch myself, something I hadn't done in years. Cooking felt meditative, each chopped vegetable and seasoned dish a small act of creation rather than obligation. Kit arrived at exactly noon, wearing khakis and a button-down shirt that still showed traces of marsh mud at the cuffs. His hair was slightly windswept, and his face carried the healthy tan of someone who spent his days working outdoors. "Eleanor," he said, embracing me with the warmth I remembered from his mother, "thank you for inviting me." Your letter sounded mysterious. "Let's eat first," I said, leading him to the sunroom where I'd set a simple table overlooking the garden. "Then we'll talk." Over lunch, Kit updated me on the progress at the research station. The $2 million donation had allowed them to purchase state-of-the-art equipment, hire 6 full-time researchers, and begin restoration projects on 3 different barrier islands. "We're documenting everything," he said, his eyes bright with enthusiasm. "Not just the ecological improvements, but the economic benefits to local communities. Healthy salt marshes protect property values, support fishing industries, and reduce flood insurance costs. We're proving that environmental protection is also economic protection." "That's exactly the kind of comprehensive thinking that impresses me about your work," I said. "You understand that sustainable solutions have to benefit people as well as ecosystems." Mom taught me that. She always said that if you want to protect something, you have to help people see its value in their own lives. Sarah's wisdom, passed down through her son to guide work she never could have imagined. The continuity felt profound, almost spiritual. "Kit," I said, setting down my fork, "I asked you here today because I need to tell you some things that will probably surprise you." He nodded, his expression growing attentive. "The anonymous donor who's been funding your organization isn't anonymous anymore. At least, not to you." "What do you mean?" "I mean that I've been your mysterious benefactor. The $500,000 initial donation, the $2 million expansion fund, all of it came from me." Kit stared at me for a long moment, processing this information. "You've been funding our work?" "I have, and I need you to know why." I told him everything. About Julian's betrayal and theft, about Camille's manipulation and greed, about my decision to restructure my entire estate around environmental protection rather than family obligation. I explained how his integrity and vision had impressed me, how his commitment to meaningful work had reminded me of my own values. "You see, Kit, I've been looking for someone worthy of trust, someone who understands that wealth is a tool for creating positive change, not just a source of personal comfort. Someone who can carry forward work that will matter long after I'm gone." Kit listened without interruption, his expression shifting from surprise to understanding, to something approaching awe. "Eleanor," he said finally, "are you telling me that you've chosen our organization as your primary charitable beneficiary?" "I'm telling you something much more significant than that." I reached into my purse and withdrew a folder that Harlan had prepared. "I'm telling you that I've named you as my heir. When I die, you'll inherit the bulk of my estate, which you use to establish a permanent endowment for coastal restoration work." The color drained from Kit's face. "How much money are we talking about?" "Approximately $12 million, plus various properties and investments that could bring the total closer to $15 million. Kit set down his water glass with shaking hands. "Eleanor, I can't. That's an enormous responsibility. I don't know if I'm qualified to manage that kind of wealth." "That's exactly why you are qualified," I said. "Someone who wants wealth for its own sake would never question their worthiness to receive it. Someone who sees wealth as responsibility, as obligation to create positive change, that person is exactly who should be trusted with it." "But what about your family? What about Camille?" "Camille chose Julian and his theft scheme over her relationship with me. She made it clear that she sees our family connection only as a source of financial benefit. I've chosen to direct my wealth towards someone who will honor its potential." Kit was quiet for several minutes, staring out at the garden where butterflies moved among the late-season blooms. "If I accept this responsibility," he said finally, "what would you want me to do with the money?" "I want you to do what you're already doing, but on a scale that can transform coastal conservation throughout the Southeast. Establish research facilities, fund restoration projects, train the next generation of environmental scientists, and prove that natural solutions can protect communities better than artificial ones. And if I fail, if I make mistakes, or the work doesn't succeed as planned, then you'll have failed while attempting something important, which is infinitely better than succeeding at something meaningless." Kit smiled at that, the first genuine smile since I'd begun my revelations. "Your mother used to say something similar," I continued. She said that the only real failure was the failure to try. She did say that. Usually when I was afraid to submit my photographs to competitions or apply for exhibitions. She was right then, and the principle applies now. Kit, I'm not asking you to be perfect. I'm asking you to be worthy of trust, and you've already proven that you are. Kit stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the harbor in the distance. If I agree to this, everything changes for me. The work, the organization, my entire life. Everything has already changed for you, I said. The question is whether you'll embrace that change or try to pretend it hasn't happened. He turned back to face me. Eleanor, I need to ask you something directly, and I need you to be completely honest. Of course. Is this about punishing Julian and Camille, or is it about supporting environmental work? The question was perceptive and fair, the kind of inquiry that demonstrated exactly the thoughtfulness I'd hoped to find in him. 6 months ago, it was about punishment, I admitted. I was angry and hurt, and I wanted to strike back at people who had betrayed me. But spending time with you, seeing your work, watching how you handle responsibility, it's become about something much more positive. What? It's become about legacy. About ensuring that my life's work continues through someone who shares my values and has the vision to extend them into the future. Kit returned to his chair, his expression serious, but determined. If I accept this inheritance, I want to establish some conditions, such as, first, I want legal oversight of my decisions for at least the first 5 years. Someone like Harlan who can ensure I'm managing the funds responsibly and making decisions that align with your vision. That's wise. Second, I want to establish an advisory board of environmental scientists, community leaders, and financial experts who can guide major decisions and keep me accountable. Also wise. And third, I want to set aside a significant portion of the funds for emergency environmental responses, oil spills, major storms, climate disasters that require immediate action. I felt a surge of pride and relief. Kit wasn't just accepting the inheritance. He was already thinking about how to use it most effectively. Those are excellent conditions, I said. Harlan can draft documents that formalize all of them. Then yes, Kit said, his voice gaining strength. Yes, I accept this responsibility. And Eleanor, I promise you that I'll use these resources to create the kind of lasting change that would make your parents proud. It will make me proud, I said, reaching across the table to squeeze his hand. And it will make your mother proud too. We spent the next 2 hours discussing practical details, how the inheritance would be structured, what kind of legal protections would be necessary, how Kit could begin preparing for the expanded responsibilities he'd face. There's one more thing, I said as he prepared to leave. I want you to take over the Blackwell Foundation as well. Merge it with your coastal restoration work, but maintain its broader charitable mission. The entire foundation? The entire foundation. Its endowment, its board structure, its history of community support. I want the Blackwell name to be associated with environmental protection and community resilience instead of society galas and charity politics. Kit nodded slowly. I'd be honored to carry forward that legacy. As I walked him to his car, Kit turned back to face me. Eleanor, I have to ask, do you ever regret cutting Julian and Camille out of your will completely? They are your family, after all. I looked back at my house, this beautiful structure that had sheltered generations of Blackwells, where I'd learned the values that now guided my decisions. Family isn't about shared genetics, I said. It's about shared values, mutual respect, and genuine care for each other's well-being. Julian and Camille forfeited their claim to family when they chose greed over love. And you don't feel guilty about their situation? I feel responsible for my own choices, not for theirs. They chose to steal from me, to lie to me, to see me only as a source of financial benefit. Those choices have consequences. Kit smiled and embraced me again. Thank you, Eleanor, for trusting me, for believing in this work, and for showing me what real legacy looks like. As I watched him drive away, I felt a profound sense of completion. For the first time in months, I wasn't planning my next move or anticipating someone else's manipulation. I was simply at peace with decisions made from integrity rather than anger. Julian and Camille had thought they were playing a long game, positioning themselves for eventual financial reward. They'd never understood that the real game was about character, about worthiness, about proving oneself deserving of trust. Kit had won that game without even knowing he was playing it. And tomorrow, I would begin the work of ensuring that his victory would benefit generations to come. Had no idea how prophetic those words would prove to be. The morning Charleston Post arrived with Julian's mugshot on the front page, his usually perfect hair, disheveled, and his expression a mixture of shock and indignation. The headline read, "Prominent attorney arrested for fraud." Below it, a smaller headline added, "Blackwell Foundation heiress cooperates with investigation." I folded the newspaper and set it aside, focusing instead on the letter I was writing. To Kit, after 3 weeks of watching Julian's case unfold in the media, after seeing Camille charged as a co-conspirator and released on bail after enduring endless phone calls from reporters and society columnists, it was time to take the final step in my transformation. It was time to tell Kit the truth. "Dear Kit, I'm writing to ask if you would join me for lunch this Saturday at my home. There are some things I need to discuss with you about your work, your future, and the anonymous donations your organization has been receiving. I believe it's time for honesty between us. With great affection, Eleanor." I sealed the letter in an envelope and asked James to deliver it personally to Kit's office at the Marine Research Station. Then I called Mo. "Are you sure you're ready for this conversation?" she asked when I explained my plans. "Once you tell him the truth about the donations and the will, everything changes." "Everything has already changed," I replied. "Julian pled guilty yesterday. He'll serve 18 months in federal prison and pay full restitution. His law license has been permanently revoked. Camille is likely to accept a plea agreement that will require her to repay the money she received from Julian's theft and perform community service." "And how do you feel about all of that?" I considered the question just as I had when Detective Rodriguez first called about Julian's arrest. "I feel like justice has been served. But more importantly, I feel like I'm finally free to build the future I actually want instead of the one I thought I was supposed to want. And that future includes Kit as your heir? That future includes Kit as the steward of resources. That can make a real difference in the world. He's proven himself over these past months, Mo. The way he's handled the anonymous donations, the vision he's developed for coastal restoration, the responsibility he's shown with significant funding he's everything Julian pretended to be." Saturday arrived with the crisp clarity that only October in Charleston could provide. I spent the morning preparing lunch myself, something I hadn't done in years. Cooking felt meditative, each chopped vegetable and seasoned dish a small act of creation rather than obligation. Kit arrived at exactly noon, wearing khakis and a button-down shirt that still showed traces of marsh mud at the cuffs. His hair was slightly windswept, and his face carried the healthy tan of someone who spent his days working outdoors. "Eleanor," he said, embracing me with the warmth I remembered from his mother, "thank you for inviting me. Your letter sounded mysterious." "Let's eat first," I said, leading him to the sunroom where I'd set a simple table overlooking the garden. "Then we'll talk." Over lunch, Kit updated me on the progress at the research station. The $2 million donation had allowed them to purchase state-of-the-art equipment, hire 6 full-time researchers, and begin restoration projects on 3 different barrier islands. "We're documenting everything," he said, his eyes bright with enthusiasm. "Not just the ecological improvements, but the economic benefits to local communities. Healthy salt marshes protect property values, support fishing industries, and reduce flood insurance costs. We're proving that environmental protection is also economic protection." "That's exactly the kind of comprehensive thinking that impresses me about your work," I said. "You understand that sustainable solutions have to benefit people as well as ecosystems." Mom taught me that. She always said that if you want to protect something, you have to help people see its value in their own lives. Sarah's wisdom, passed down through her son to guide work she never could have imagined. The continuity felt profound, almost spiritual. "Kit," I said, setting down my fork, "I asked you here today because I need to tell you some things that will probably surprise you." He nodded, his expression growing attentive. "The anonymous donor who's been funding your organization isn't anonymous anymore. At least, not to you." "What do you mean?" "I mean that I've been your mysterious benefactor. The $500,000 initial donation, the $2 million expansion fund, all of it came from me." Kit stared at me for a long moment, processing this information. "You've been funding our work?" "I have, and I need you to know why." I told him everything. About Julian's betrayal and theft, about Camille's manipulation and greed, about my decision to restructure my entire estate around environmental protection rather than family obligation. I explained how his integrity and vision had impressed me, how his commitment to meaningful work had reminded me of my own values. You see, Kit, I've been looking for someone worthy of trust, someone who understands that wealth is a tool for creating positive change, not just a source of personal comfort. Someone who can carry forward work that will matter long after I'm gone. Kit listened without interruption, his expression shifting from surprise to understanding to something approaching awe. Eleanor, he said finally, are you telling me that you've chosen our organization as your primary charitable beneficiary? I'm telling you something much more significant than that. I reached into my purse and withdrew a folder that Harlan had prepared. I'm telling you that I've named you as my heir. When I die, you'll inherit the bulk of my estate, which you use to establish a permanent endowment for coastal restoration work. The color drained from Kit's face. How much money are we talking about? Approximately $12 million, plus various properties and investments that could bring the total closer to $15 million. Kit set down his water glass with shaking hands. Eleanor, I can't. That's an enormous responsibility. I don't know if I'm qualified to manage that kind of wealth. That's exactly why you are qualified, I said. Someone who wants wealth for its own sake would never question their worthiness to receive it. Someone who sees wealth as responsibility, as obligation to create positive change, that person is exactly who should be trusted with it. But what about your family? What about Camille? Camille chose Julian and his theft scheme over her relationship with me. She made it clear that she sees our family connection only as a source of financial benefit. I've chosen to direct my wealth towards someone who will honor its potential. Kit was quiet for several minutes, staring out at the garden where butterflies moved among the late-season blooms. If I accept this responsibility, he said finally, what would you want me to do with the money? I want you to do what you're already doing, but on a scale that can transform coastal conservation throughout the Southeast. Establish research facilities, fund restoration projects, train the next generation of environmental scientists, and prove that natural solutions can protect communities better than artificial ones. And if I fail, if I make mistakes, or the work doesn't succeed as planned, then you'll have failed while attempting something important, which is infinitely better than succeeding at something meaningless. Kit smiled at that, the first genuine smile since I'd begun my revelations. Your mother used to say something similar, I continued. She said that the only real failure was the failure to try. She did say that, usually when I was afraid to submit my photographs to competitions or apply for exhibitions. She was right then, and the principle applies now. Kit, I'm not asking you to be perfect. I'm asking you to be worthy of trust, and you've already proven that you are. Kit stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the harbor in the distance. If I agree to this, everything changes for me. The work, the organization, my entire life. Everything has already changed for you, I said. The question is whether you'll embrace that change or try to pretend it hasn't happened. He turned back to face me. Eleanor, I need to ask you something directly, and I need you to be completely honest. Of course. Is this about punishing Julian and Camille, or is it about supporting environmental work? The question was perceptive and fair, the kind of inquiry that demonstrated exactly the thoughtfulness I'd hoped to find in him. 6 months ago, it was about punishment, I admitted. I was angry and hurt, and I wanted to strike back at people who had betrayed me. But spending time with you, seeing your work, watching how you handle responsibility, it's become about something much more positive. What? It's become about legacy, about ensuring that my life's work continues through someone who shares my values and has the vision to extend them into the future. Kit returned to his chair, his expression serious but determined. If I accept this inheritance, I want to establish some conditions, such as, first, I want legal oversight of my decisions for at least the first 5 years. Someone like Harlan who can ensure I'm managing the funds responsibly and making decisions that align with your vision. That's wise. Second, I want to establish an advisory board of environmental scientists, community leaders, and financial experts who can guide major decisions and keep me accountable. Also wise. And third, I want to set aside a significant portion of the funds for emergency environmental responses, oil spills, major storms, climate disasters that require immediate action. I felt a surge of pride and relief. Kit wasn't just accepting the inheritance. He was already thinking about how to use it most effectively. Those are excellent conditions, I said. Harlan can draft documents that formalize all of them. Then yes, Kit said, his voice gaining strength. Yes, I accept this responsibility. And Eleanor, I promise you that I'll use these resources to create the kind of lasting change that would make your parents proud. It will make me proud, I said, reaching across the table to squeeze his hand. And it will make your mother proud too. We spent the next 2 hours discussing practical details, how the inheritance would be structured, what kind of legal protections would be necessary, how Kit could begin preparing for the expanded responsibilities he'd face. There's one more thing, I said as he prepared to leave. I want you to take over the Blackwell Foundation as well. Merge it with your coastal restoration work, but maintain its broader charitable mission. The entire foundation? The entire foundation. Its endowment, its board structure, its history of community support. I want the Blackwell name to be associated with environmental protection and community resilience instead of society galas and charity politics. Kit nodded slowly. I'd be honored to carry forward that legacy. As I walked him to his car, Kit turned back to face me. Eleanor, I have to ask, do you ever regret cutting Julian and Camille out of your will completely? They are your family. After all, I looked back at my house, this beautiful structure that had sheltered generations of Blackwells, where I'd learned the values that now guided my decisions. Family isn't about shared genetics, I said. It's about shared values, mutual respect, and genuine care for each other's well-being. Julian and Camille forfeited their claim to family when they chose greed over love. And you don't feel guilty about their situation? I feel responsible for my own choices, not for theirs. They chose to steal from me, to lie to me, to see me only as a source of financial benefit. Those choices have consequences. Kit smiled and embraced me again. Thank you, Eleanor, for trusting me, for believing in this work, and for showing me what real legacy looks like. As I watched him drive away, I felt a profound sense of completion. For the first time in months, I wasn't planning my next move or anticipating someone else's manipulation. I was simply at peace with decisions made from integrity rather than anger. Julian and Camille had thought they were playing a long game, positioning themselves for eventual financial reward. They'd never understood that the real game was about character, about worthiness, about proving oneself deserving of trust. Kit had won that game without even knowing he was playing it. And tomorrow, I would begin the work of ensuring that his victory would benefit generations to come. 1 year later, I stood in the renovated lobby of the Blackwell Foundation building, watching Kit address a crowd of scientists, community leaders, and environmental advocates gathered for the grand opening of the Coastal Futures Research Institute. The building itself had been transformed from a traditional charitable foundation into something that looked more like a cutting-edge research facility, all glass walls and collaborative spaces designed for the kind of interdisciplinary work Kit envisioned. When Eleanor Blackwell first challenged me to think beyond restoration projects to ecosystem transformation, Kit was saying, his voice carrying clearly through the crowd, I thought she was asking the impossible. Today, as we open this research institute, I realized she was simply asking me to think big enough to match the scale of the problems we face. I smiled at the reference, remembering the conversation we'd had 6 months ago when Kit had proposed this ambitious expansion of the Foundation's mission. He'd been nervous about suggesting such dramatic changes to an institution that had existed for 50 years, but I'd encouraged him to reimagine everything from the ground up. The plaque beside the main entrance bore simple words, in honor of Eleanor Blackwell, builder of futures. Kit had wanted something more elaborate, but I'd insisted on understated elegance. The building itself would be my monument. I didn't need my name carved in marble. Eleanor. Mo appeared at my elbow, elegant in a navy dress that perfectly complemented the building's modern aesthetic. You're practically glowing. I haven't seen you look this happy in years. I feel different, I admitted, watching Kit field questions from a reporter about the Institute's research priorities. Lighter somehow, as if I've finally figured out what I'm supposed to be doing with my life. And what's that? Creating things that will outlast me. Building systems that will continue working long after I'm gone. Mo followed my gaze to Kit, who was now speaking with a group of graduate students about internship opportunities at the Institute. He's grown into the role beautifully, hasn't he? He has. Better than I could have hoped. In the past year, Kit had proven himself worthy of my trust in ways that continued to surprise me. He'd navigated the complex transition from small, nonprofit to major research institution with remarkable skill, hiring talented scientists while maintaining the community focus that had always distinguished his work. More importantly, he'd handled sudden wealth with the kind of integrity that Julian had never possessed. The Institute now employed 42 people from Ph.D. researchers to community outreach coordinators. They'd completed restoration projects on 8 barrier islands, established 3 permanent research stations, and published findings that were influencing coastal protection policy throughout the Southeast. Kit had taken my $12 million inheritance and turned it into something that was already generating its own momentum. Mrs. Blackwell, a young woman with a press badge, approached us. I'm Jessica Chen from Charleston Living. Could I ask you a few questions about the foundation's evolution? Of course. This transformation from traditional charity to environmental research institute is quite dramatic. What inspired such a significant change? I glanced at Kit, who was now examining a display about salt marsh restoration with the intense focus I'd come to recognize as his signature trait. I realized that addressing symptoms wasn't enough, I said. Traditional charity often helps people cope with problems without necessarily solving them. Environmental research and restoration work addresses root causes. It creates solutions that benefit entire communities for generations. And you're confident that this new direction will have the impact you're hoping for? I'm confident that the work being done here will continue long after I'm gone, which is the only kind of impact that really matters. After the reporter moved on, Mo and I walked through the building's main gallery, where photographs and displays chronicled the evolution of coastal restoration science. One wall featured a timeline of the Institute's work, beginning with Kit's original marsh restoration project and extending through current research into climate adaptation strategies. Have you heard anything from Julian or Camille lately? Mo asked as we paused in front of a display about community resilience planning. Julian was released from federal prison 2 months ago, I said. He's moved to Atlanta, where he's working as a paralegal at a personal injury firm. His attorney sent Harlan a letter confirming that all restitution has been paid. And Camille? She finished her community service and moved to Asheville. I heard she's working for a nonprofit that provides business consulting to women entrepreneurs. Apparently, she's discovered she has a talent for helping people manage money responsibly. Mo raised an eyebrow. The irony is almost too perfect. I hope she's learned from her mistakes. I genuinely do. But I don't regret the choices I made. No lingering guilt about cutting them out of your will? None whatsoever. They made their choices, and I made mine. The difference is that my choices have created something lasting and positive. We continued our walk through the building, eventually finding ourselves in Kit's office on the 3rd floor. The space was large but simply furnished, with one wall dominated by a map of the South Carolina coast marked with current and proposed research sites. Eleanor, Kit said, looking up from a conversation with 2 researchers. Perfect timing. Dr. Martinez and Dr. Patel were just telling me about the results from the Kiowa Island restoration project. The success rate has exceeded all our projections, Dr. Martinez explained, her eyes bright with excitement. 93% survival rate for transplanted Spartina grass, and we're seeing significant increases in fish populations and bird nesting activity. More importantly, Dr. Patel added, the restored marsh weathered Hurricane Isabel with minimal damage, while nearby developed areas suffered significant flooding. We're documenting real proof that natural barriers work better than seawalls. That's the kind of evidence that changes policy, I observed. When you can demonstrate that environmental protection also protects property values and reduces insurance costs, you get attention from people who might not care about birds and fish. Kit nodded approvingly. That's exactly what we're working toward, making environmental protection economically compelling, not just morally necessary. As the researchers returned to their work, Kit gestured for Mo and me to sit in the comfortable chairs arranged near his office window. Eleanor, there's something I wanted to discuss with you, he said, his tone growing serious. The Institute has been so successful that we're receiving requests from other coastal states to help establish similar programs. That's wonderful news. It is, but it raises questions about expansion. We could use the foundation's resources to support coastal restoration work in Georgia, North Carolina, even Florida. But that would mean growing far beyond what you originally envisioned. I considered his concern, recognizing the thoughtfulness that had convinced me to trust him with my legacy. Kit, when I decided to leave you my estate, I wasn't trying to control your decisions from beyond the grave. I was trying to ensure that someone with wisdom and integrity would have the resources to do important work. But this would be a major shift in scope. This would be exactly what environmental protection needs. I interrupted gently. You've proven that your model works here in South Carolina. If other states want to replicate your success, you should help them. That's how lasting change happens, through replication and adaptation. Kit smiled, relief evident in his expression. I was hoping you'd say that. We've already had preliminary discussions with researchers in North Carolina about establishing a sister institute near the Outer Banks. Then you should pursue it. But Kit, I want you to promise me something. Anything. Promise me that you'll never lose sight of the community focus that made your original work so successful. Environmental protection has to benefit the people who live in these coastal areas, not just the ecosystems themselves. I promise. That's actually what makes our model different from traditional conservation approaches. We work with communities instead of imposing solutions on them. Mo had been listening to our conversation with the slight smile she wore when watching people she cared about make good decisions. Eleanor, she said, you've created something remarkable here. Not just the institute, but the way you've handled this entire transition. A year ago, you were dealing with betrayal and fraud and family dysfunction. Now you're launching something that could influence environmental policy for decades. A year ago, I was living someone else's vision of what my life should be, I replied. Now I'm living my own. That evening, after the reception had ended and the building had emptied, I found myself alone in the lobby, looking up at the plaque bearing my name. The words "builder of futures" seemed both accurate and inadequate. How do you capture the complexity of transformation in just 3 words? My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Eleanor, this is Camille. I saw the news coverage of the Institute's opening. What you've built is beautiful. I'm proud of you. I stared at the message for a long moment, surprised by the mixture of emotions it triggered. Sadness for what our relationship had been, relief that she seemed to be building a better life, and something approaching forgiveness for the pain we'd caused each other. I typed back, "Thank you. I hope you're well." It wasn't much, but it felt like enough. Some bridges once burned couldn't be rebuilt, but acknowledgement was possible, and perhaps in time, something approaching peace. 3 days later, I sat in Harlan's office, signing the final documents that would transfer full control of the Blackwell Foundation to Kit. The legal transition had been complex, requiring approval from the foundation's board and careful structuring to maintain its charitable status while dramatically expanding its mission. This is the last signature required, Harlan said, sliding a document across his desk. Once you sign this, Christopher Ainsley will have complete authority over foundation operations and assets. I signed my name with the same deliberate care I'd used when first rewriting my will 18 months ago, but this time, the gesture felt celebratory rather than vindictive. Harlan, do you think my parents would approve of what I've done? He considered the question with the gravity he brought to all important matters. Your parents believed that wealth was a responsibility, not a privilege. They built the foundation to serve community needs and protect Charleston's heritage. What you've done extends those principles in ways they probably never imagined, but would certainly admire. Even though I cut my only living relative out of my will, especially because you prioritize character over genetics. Your parents raised you to make difficult decisions based on principles rather than sentiment. This situation required exactly that kind of moral courage. That afternoon, I drove to Magnolia Cemetery, where my parents were buried beneath ancient live oaks draped in Spanish moss. I hadn't visited their graves since Julian's arrest, but today felt like the right time for conversation with people who'd shaped my understanding of responsibility and legacy. I think you'd like Kit, I said aloud, placing fresh flowers on their shared headstone. He reminds me of you, Dad, practical and idealistic at the same time. And he has Mom's gift for seeing potential where other people see problems. The cemetery was quiet except for the sound of wind through the trees and distant traffic from the city beyond. I sat on the bench beside their grave, watching clouds drift across the harbor, feeling more connected to my parents than I had in years. I know you probably would have preferred that I work things out with Camille, I continued, but I think you'd understand why I couldn't. Family isn't about blood, it's about shared values and mutual respect. Kit embodies those things in ways that Julian and Camille never did. As I drove home through Charleston's historic streets, I felt a profound sense of completion. The house that had sheltered generations of Blackwells would soon shelter someone new. I'd decided to deed the property to the Institute as my final gift, ensuring that Kit would have a permanent base for his expanding work. Julian and Camille had seen my wealth as something to be acquired and consumed. Kit saw it as something to be invested and multiplied. The difference wasn't just about money, it was about understanding the relationship between privilege and responsibility. That evening, I sat on my back veranda with a glass of wine, watching the sun set over Charleston Harbor. The view was the same one my great-grandfather had enjoyed when he first built this house, the same one my parents had shared during their 40-year marriage, the same one that had witnessed my own transformation from victim to architect of my own future. Tomorrow, I would begin packing for the move to my new condominium downtown, a smaller space that would suit my simpler life. The house would become Kit's, along with the responsibility for continuing work that might outlast us both. I raised my glass to the sunset, thinking about the year that had changed everything. Julian was rebuilding his life in Atlanta, probably still believing that he'd been unfairly prosecuted for minor financial infractions. Camille was finding her way in Asheville, perhaps finally learning to build something through her own efforts rather than someone else's generosity. And Kit was preparing to expand coastal restoration work throughout the Southeast, using resources that would have been wasted on luxury cars and expensive vacations if Julian's original plan had succeeded. To builders of futures, I said aloud, echoing the words on the Institute's plaque. The harbor reflected the sunset like scattered gold, Charleston's enduring beauty stretching toward horizons that promised new possibilities. I'd spent my life in the city, watching it change and grow while maintaining its essential character. Now I was part of that continuity, having helped create something that would benefit Charleston and its coastal neighbors for generations to come. Julian had divorced me from my sister, believing he could secure his future through manipulation and theft. Instead, his betrayal had freed me to discover my own values and redirect my wealth towards someone worthy of trust. In the end, he'd given me the greatest gift imaginable, the chance to build a legacy that would outlast us all. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.